Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Our book today is How to Get Rid of a President by David Preece. And this is from the chapter Rejected by the Party, starting on page 12, kind of mid-chapter. Presidents need not be thrown out on the polls, at the polls on Election Day to find themselves dislodged from the White House. History shows us that a chief executive's own political allies can remove that incumbent when they perceive him as unpopular or unfit. Refusing to nominate a president for a second term, or better yet, getting the incumbent to realize that he should walk away before it becomes an embarrassing vote at the convention, does bring the party significant pain. But many politicians have calculated that discarding their own party's toxic president by internal action is better than waiting for the voters to do it. This dynamic remained absent for the first half century or so of American politics. George Washington, who didn't represent any formal party, set a precedent by stepping away from re-election after 2 terms. Successor after successor followed suit, keeping the support of their parties until they left office after 8 years. Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and Jackson lost the next election. Both Adamses and Van Buren, or met the Grim Reaper, Harrison. John Tyler, if only in this one respect, was a trendsetter. He began a 6-president cascade of men who failed to appear on their party's ballot in the general election after their first term. One, Zachary Taylor, literally had no choice. Like Harrison, he died in office. The others, by staying alive through their 4-year terms, could have carried their party's banners again on Election Day. Not one did, as national agonizing over slavery and other tensions within each of the major parties made it difficult for any president to build and sustain a governing coalition. Of those 5 chief executives, only James Polk left with a solid reputation and a ledger of successes. He'd told Democrats upon his nomination in 1844, "I shall enter upon the discharge of the high and solemn duties of the office with the settled purpose of not being a candidate for re-election." And he stayed true to his word. It was just as well, only 3 months after what would have been his second inauguration, he died at the age of 53. The 3 presidents who followed Polk, the forgettable series of Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, and James Buchanan, shared 3 characteristics. First, historians routinely rank them among the nation's worst presidents. Second, and related to that, they took no responsibility for resolving the national moral failure of slavery. And third, no matter how they had attained office, they, like future presidents Chester Arthur and Lyndon Johnson, found themselves spurned by their own parties. The Whigs had learned in 1840 that a celebrity candidate seemed to have an easier route into the White House than a party regular. So in 1848, they nominated General Zachary Taylor, a recent hero of battlefields in the Mexican-American War. Despite his lack of solid political principles or any apparent passion for the job, just 2 years earlier he'd said with apparent sincerity, "I am not and never shall be an aspirant for that honor," Taylor won the election over Democratic candidate Lewis Cass. In July 1850, he became the second straight Whig general to president who couldn't make it to the next election alive. Vice President Millard Fillmore took his place. Fillmore had risen to prominence in New York's anti-Mason party dedicated to exposing and opposing Freemason fraternal organizations, but switched allegiance to the Whigs in the 1830s. In the first year and a half of the administration, inter-party rivals had manipulated Taylor better than Fillmore did, leaving him little to do but preside over the Senate and stew over his fate in a useless job. But as president, he was prepared to avenge perceived slights. Ahead of their expected dismissal, all the cabinet members whom Fillard had inherited from Taylor offered their resignations, which were quickly accepted by the new president. He asked them to remain in place for 1 month. They agreed to stay for 1 week. Fillmore would proceed to fire more previous political appointees than any of his successors had. More than half of those at the State Department, for example, had to find new jobs. The biggest development during Fillmore's presidency was the Compromise of 1850. This set of bills admitted California to the Union as a free state, allowed the organization of the Utah and New Mexico territories without reference to slavery, resolved both the Texas state boundary and the Lone Star State's remaining debt, abolished the slave trade in the District of Columbia, and reaffirmed the fugitive slave law that required the returning of slaves escaped across state lines. Fillmore signed each bill, believing this package of measures had fixed what he considered an annoying issue that kept getting in the way of his other priorities. The compromise bills delayed a war between the states, but at a cost. They not only perpetuated slavery, but split the Whigs further apart, as most Northerners refused to abide by the fugitive slave law. Congressional elections in November 1850 increased the Democratic opposition's majorities in both the House and the Senate. The rest of the president's term was so bad that the highlight might have been the start of Commodore Matthew Perry's voyage to Japan to open that country to American trade, even though he didn't arrive until Fillmore left office. Not long after rising to become the chief executive, Fillmore declared he wouldn't run again in the 1852 election. He reiterated that in 1851. But the trappings of presidential power and the pleas of his remaining party faithful convinced him to retract that pledge and make a late entry into the field of candidates. He portrayed his about face as a noble personal sacrifice for the good of the party and the country. And during the spring of that election year, 8 Whig state conventions endorsed him. As delegates gathered for what a leading historian of the era calls the longest, most rancorous, and most debilitating Whig national convention ever to meet, the first tally had Fillmore in the lead. How to get rid of a president.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Jefferson Smith, sitting in for Thom Hartmann today. Hope you're well and honored to be here. We're going to go straight to an interview. Across the small L liberal tradition and across the conservative tradition, there is a claim that's made, at the very least, a question. The claim is that government's first duty is to keep us safe. It is at least a question. Is government's first duty to keep us safe? As a kid, when I would hear about liberal mumbo jumbo and social welfare mumbo jumbo, trying to help people live better lives, or, care about trees and forests, that it was failing to acknowledge the first duty of government, which was to keep people safe. Now, I think it's an arguable preposition, an arguable proposition. But very often when that argument is made, all that's talked about next is, the military or police. On the line with us now is Dr. Sanjeev Shriram, calling to us from California, who's going to talk to us about what's been happening with Medicaid. And if the government's duty is to keep us safe and to keep us alive, and if the first priority of any legislation is to not result in the loss of human life, connecting the dots between what's happening with Medicaid and what's been happening with human life now is something the good doctor can help us with. Happy Veterans Day, sir. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Doctor, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Go ahead. What are we learning now about what's happening with Medicaid deaths and the loss of life?
Yeah, so the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities just published a report last week, and what it shows is that Medicaid expansion, that is the expansion of Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, has saved at least 19,000 lives nationwide. And in states that did not expand the program under the ACA, there are 15,000 people who have died prematurely as a result of that political choice. And that is, it's actually, mind-boggling to see this data, because the people who did the study did the really hard work of trying to figure out, okay, if a life is saved in the 2014 to 2017 timeframe in a state that expanded Medicaid, how do you know whether that life that was saved was because of Medicaid expansion or because this person chose to put on their seatbelt or, got a ride when they were too intoxicated to drive? How do you know that this life was saved from that? And they did a painstaking amount of detailed research to come to this number, and it is 19,000 lives at least were saved in states that chose to expand Medicaid between 2014 and 2017.
So say the numbers again, and then I want to go back to methodology. And thanks for being with us, by the way.
Yeah, sure. Oh, yeah, glad to be here. So the numbers again, if your state expanded Medicaid, you live in a state that, along with other states that made that same policy choice to expand Medicaid, 19,000 lives at least have been saved. If you live in a state that has chosen not to expand Medicaid, there are 15,000 premature deaths that have happened because of that policy choice.
So give us some examples about the ways that lives have been saved or the ways that lives have been lost that help us give some texture to those numbers.
Yeah, so according to this report, one of the most important things that happens when people are in undercoverage with Medicaid is that they are rescued from false choices. And what do I mean by that? I mean that when people, manage to go to the doctor, like someone like me, and I give them a prescription, and then they have to turn around and go to the pharmacy, and now they have to decide, okay, I only have so much money in my pocketbook. I've got to figure out groceries. I've got to figure out stuff for the kids. I've got to figure out my own prescriptions. When you live in a state that expanded Medicaid, the cost of your prescriptions just went down enough where you don't have to choose against getting your prescription so that you can, so you can feed your family. You can afford to do both, which is kind of what you're supposed to be doing in the richest country in the world. But that's actually a huge example of how you can save lives because people are able to, take care of themselves and do preventive medicine and take care of their conditions before they get really bad. And that's exactly what guys like me wanted to go into healthcare for, was to help people get better and to, not have to deal with this nonsense of, am I going to eat or am I going to, get the prescription that the doctor said?
So in states that adopted Medicaid expansion, they saved 19,000 lives. In states that declined Medicaid expansion, they lost 15,000 lives. Did I get those facts right? And then say more about the methodology. How do we know that that those numbers are accurate?
Yeah, so you got the numbers correct. And the way that we know that these numbers are right is that the researchers actually did a lot. They spent a lot of time with looking at data from the American Community Survey. It's the largest federal survey which has information on income, age, and other determinants of Medicaid eligibility. And then they line those up against administrative death records. And you're able to take these huge sample sets and compare, okay, so we know that this many people in this state, finally became eligible for Medicaid. And we also see that there is this big drop off in the death rate in those states for those age groups because people who were, previously maybe, at risk of dying because they couldn't afford to go to the doctor are now under Medicaid and they're getting to see the doctor finally. And so it's a lot. It takes a lot of time and detail to go through this data, but these researchers have done it. And in fact, they're speculating that the 19,000 lives saved might be an underestimate for the number of people saved simply because one of the things that they found was that the longer Medicaid expansion has been going on in your state, the more and more lives have been saved.
When we compare this with the loss of life from, any number of highly publicized threats, heck, the president and previous president's focus on terrorist attacks, hard to find. What are larger drivers of premature loss of life? Maybe auto crashes. I know gun violence is maybe still tobacco. Where does this, if you were going to try to rank stuff, and maybe it's apples and oranges, but if you're going to try to rank this, put this in some context with other threats, how would you help give it some context?
Well, I'm glad you brought up the automobile issue because what the researchers themselves found, this is not just me saying this as somebody who's a fan of Medicaid and believes in the program and wants to see it expanded everywhere, but what the researchers found is that if every state had expanded Medicaid to the best of their ability, the number of lives saved among adults in 2017 would roughly equal the number of lives that seatbelts saved across the entire American population.
When we look at the states that have turned it down, I'm actually looking at a map right now that I think is accurate, that's showing that, it's basically the South, right? Some in the Midwest as well. But where are the states that Mike Bevin just had a highly publicized loss as Kentucky governor and linked to his own declining, own attempts to decline, but eventual adoption of Medicaid expansion, I think. But it looks like a lot of the southern states and a lot of the red states turned it down. How would you characterize the states that have done it versus the states that haven't expanded their Medicaid programs?
Well, I mean, this is now my personal opinion. It's not reflecting the researchers. But to me, ever since the ACA went into effect in 2013, which is the first year that Medicaid expansion became available to states and that it was an option for them to either expand the program or not, it really does feel that the more spiteful your state was against a black president, namely Barack Obama, then the worse chances were that your state was going to expand the program. And it's really tragic to see these numbers because when you look at a state like Florida, there are over 2,000 lives that could have been saved from 2014 to 2017 had the state chosen to expand Medicaid. You know, similarly in North Carolina, there's 1,400 lives that are at risk, they have in North Carolina they have a Democratic governor and a Republican legislature, and so there's this gridlock that is stopping Medicaid from being expanded. And it's tragic that this level of pettiness and this type of what I feel is racism in politics, that a black president's policy is not being acted upon, is tragic because the lives that are at stake and the conditions that I take care of don't really care what your politics are. Diabetes and asthma and seizure and cancer, they don't care who you vote for. They don't care where you get your news from. And this is life or death. And we should be better than this as people. We might have our political differences, but when it comes to public health, we need to be better than this and expand Medicaid in every single state.
Well, I'll tell you, Doctor, the map tells the story that your words are telling. That to me, it's not quite a map of the Confederacy, but it resembles it significantly, right? It's Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, moving over a little bit, Oklahoma and Texas. Then it starts getting a little north. You still, Missouri, Kansas, South Dakota, Wyoming, Wisconsin. But as soon as you get to the American West, as soon as you get to the Northeast, as soon as you get to Washington, Oregon, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Montana, Maine, New York, Pennsylvania, etc., all of them adopted Medicaid expansion. All of them saved 19,000 lives, and you say that might be an underestimate. And if you look down the states of the Confederacy, they all crushed, with the exception of Kentucky and Virginia, who did their best to crush it, or at least Kentucky. Virginia, which just won a trifecta of Democrats winning. You move into the Deep South, and it seems to bear your story pretty well.
And, you know, what I would say about Kentucky and Virginia is that they have an opportunity to use this newfound knowledge and look at what has been working and what's not been working with their Medicaid expansion. In Kentucky, the first Governor Beshear did the right thing of expanding the program as soon as he got the opportunity. And in Kentucky, the number of lives saved cannot be exaggerated. I mean, they did a fantastic job of saving people, and especially in the midst of an opioid crisis that hits Appalachia particularly hard. Medicaid worked wonders in Kentucky during the first Beshear's term. Now that a new Beshear is in, I would ask that governor to look at this data, and I would actually ask the Virginia legislature to do the same, is to look at this data and to ask, where are we putting up hurdles in front of people when it comes to Medicaid eligibility and enrollment, where we don't need hurdles and where we could actually be saving more lives? In Virginia, they've got work requirements where I would say, repeal the work requirements, but then also look at, whether you've got unnecessary time limits, whether you've got kids and families who are slipping in and out of coverage with Medicaid, and get rid of that, streamline it, make it easier for people to hold on to this coverage, because we have proof that this is saving lives.
Doctor, do you need to bounce? You can just stick with us for a minute.
I can stick around.
We'll be right back. You listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jefferson Smith sitting in. Happy Veterans Day. Thanks to all who serve, and thank you for listening to this program. We'll be right back. Good morning, everybody. It is Monday. It is Veterans Day, and a reminder of the Atlantic Monthly article written, 2 decades ago, that made the case for moving voting day to Veterans Day. as a way of making sure that everybody could access the franchise. Right now, in terms of governmental duties, not only to ensure democracy, but to ensure human safety and protection, we have on the line Dr. Sanjeev Sriram, who is sharing the research that demonstrates what happened with states that did adopt Medicaid expansion and those states that did not adopt Medicaid expansion, and a difference of 19,000 lives saved for those states that did, and 15,000 lives lost for those states that did not. And Doctor, thanks for sticking with us for just another minute or two. What do you say to those folks who say, but we shouldn't give it to Mexicans? We can't extend Medicaid until the borders are secured, until we've built a wall. We don't expand Medicaid. We'll be saving the wrong lives, not American lives, not people who have become Americans by a legal process based on current laws. What's your response to that? Why should we prioritize Medicaid expansion when there's other things to worry about?
So whenever I mean, because I've heard this question before, and, I always like to look behind the question and figure out who's asking it and how do they benefit when we are divided, when patients and families who are struggling, right? Because all of us are struggling with this current healthcare system, and so many of us are, struggling to pay for the prescriptions, to pay for the copays and the premiums and everything else. If you move between one state and another, are you at risk of losing Medicaid coverage? All of us are struggling with this right now. And by taking our struggle and turning it towards animosity for immigrants, we are doing the dirty work of an oligarchy, of an aristocracy that is happy to see us struggle and is even happier not to pitch in to help in any kind of way. And I think the only person who is really happy to see us fight against immigrants when it comes to our health care are those billionaires who are not going to be held accountable for what they owe the system. And I would say that we are the richest country on earth. We can afford to take care of every single human being in this country, regardless of immigration status, documentation status, where they were born, whatever. We can afford to do it. We are the richest country in the world, in the history of the world. And I just reject the false choice that we can't do this for everyone.
And Doctor, what is happening? Is there any impact of this data or any of the states that have rejected Medicaid expansion? Do we have any indication that any of them are rethinking or that the voters within those states are demanding change?
So, when you look at that map, right, that you were alluding to before, to me, some of the brightest signs of hope are when you look at Nebraska, Utah, and Idaho. These are, classically red states, and they're, they fit a conservative mold in a lot of the conventional political reporting. But when given the chance to ask voters, do you want to expand Medicaid in your state under the Affordable Care Act, each of those three states, the voters, the everyday people, said absolutely yes, we must expand Medicaid by huge majorities in Nebraska, Utah, and Idaho. They were willing, everyday people are looking past their own politics and are doing what's right for public health. What's tragic is that you've got these state legislatures and governors who are either trying to block the will of the people, stall it, or do the barest minimum possible so they can legally say that, yeah, we kind of did what the voters wanted, but we didn't do the full spirit of what the voters wanted. And so I look at us as, everyday people, and I have a lot more optimism that we know what we need to do to take care of each other. And it's that we have got political machines that we have got to take back and re-own and bring them to our will.
Well, Doctor, really appreciate your time. If there were a site or a reference that you wanted to plug, that you wanted people to take a look at, where you wanted people to find out more, where would that be?
Well, the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities has the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities has this report that we've been referring to on their website. It's cvpp.org. I myself am working on Medicare for All and making racial justice a cornerstone of Medicare for All. And that work can be found at socialsecurityworks.org/all-means-all.
And you're at Twitter at Dr. Sriram, which is DRSRIRAM. Doctor, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much. Happy Veterans Day.
Well, folks, as we figure out how to protect a country, and as we celebrate a day that celebrates people who helped protect a country, who helped defeat American enemies, let's think carefully about what those American enemies are. Let's think about what protection in the 21st century really means. What are the threats we really face? And if you're listing those threats, how many of those threats are internal? And by that, I don't just mean domestic terrorists. I don't mean criminals. I mean our ability versus our inability to apply existing medical expertise with existing resources in existing facilities to make sure that our people don't die. And I know that there is effort to divide human beings. I know that there is incredible effort to say, no, don't worry about what's happening with gaping wealth disparities and divisions of power greater than any time since the turn of the last century. Just worry about the other. But if we're thinking about the country and protecting the country, protecting the people here, let's be real about what we're really protecting. And if we're protecting human life, well, keep people healthy, pretty good start. We'll be right back. This is Tom Show. I'm Jeff. Honored to be with you.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And you're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jefferson Smith.
Today we're reading from David Blight's book, Frederick Douglass, Prophet of Freedom. This is from the introduction. In his speech at the dedication of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., September 24, 2016, President Barack Obama delivered what he termed a, quote, clear-eyed view of a tragic and triumphant history of black Americans in the United States. He spoke of a history that is central to the larger American story, one that is both contradictory and extraordinary. He likened the African American experience to the infinite depths of Shakespeare and Scripture. The, quote, embrace of truth as best we can know it, said the president, is, quote, where real patriotism lies. Naming some of the major pivots of the country's past, Obama wrapped up his central theme in a remarkable sentence about the Civil War era. Quote, we've buttoned up our Union blues to join the fight for our freedom. We've railed against injustice for decade upon decade, a lifetime of struggle and progress and enlightenment that we see etched in Frederick Douglass's mighty leonine gaze, end quote. How Americans react to Douglass's gaze, indeed how we gaze back at his visage, and more important, how we read him, appropriate him, or engage his legacies, informs how we use our past to determine who we are. Douglass's life and writing emerged from nearly the full scope of the 19th century, representative of the best and the worst in the American spirit. Douglass constantly probed the ironies of America's contradictions over slavery and race. Few Americans use Shakespeare and the Bible to comprehend his story and that of his people as much as Douglass. And there may be no better example of an American radical patriot than the slave who became a lyrical prophet of freedom, natural rights, and human equality. Obama channeled Douglass in his dedication speech, knowingly or not. So do many people today. Born Frederick Augustus Washington Bailey, a slave, in Talbot County, Maryland, in February 1818, the future Frederick Douglass was the son of Harriet Bailey, one of 5 daughters of Betsy Bailey, and with some likelihood his mother's white owner. He saw his mother for the last time in 1825, though he hardly knew her. She died the following year. Douglas lived 20 years as a slave and nearly 9 years as a fugitive slave subject to recapture. From the 1840s to his death in 1895, he attained international fame as an abolitionist, editor, orator of almost unparalleled signature, and the author of 3 autobiographies that are classics of the genre. As a public man, he began his abolitionist career 2 decades before America would divide and fight a civil war over slavery that he openly welcomed. Douglas was born in a backwater of the slave society of the South, just as steamboats appeared in bays and on American rivers, and before the telegraph, the railroad, and the rotary press changed human mobility and consciousness. He died after the emergence of electric lights, the telephone, and the invention of the phonograph. The renewed orator and traveler loved and used most of these elements of modernity and technology. Douglas was the most photographed American of the 19th century, explained in this book and especially by the intrepid research of 3 other scholars I write upon. Although it can never really be measured, he may also have been, along with Mark Twain, the most widely traveled American public figure of his century. By the 1890s, in sheer miles and countless number of speeches, he had few rivals as a lecturer in the golden age of oratory. It is likely that more Americans heard Frederick Douglass speak than any other public figure of his time. Indeed, to see or hear Douglass became a kind of wonder of the American world. He struggled as well with the pleasures and perils of fame as much as anyone else in his century, with the possible exceptions of General Ulysses S. Grant or P.T. Barnum. Douglass's dilemma with fame was a matter of decades, not merely of moments, and fraught with racism. The orator and writer lived to see and interpret black emancipation, to work actively for women's rights long before they were achieved, to realize the civil rights triumphs and tragedies of Reconstruction, and to witness and contribute to America's economic and international expansion in the Gilded Age. He lived to the age of lynching and Jim Crow laws, when America collapsed into retreat from the real victories and revolutions in race relations that he had helped to win. He played a pivotal role in America's second founding out of the apocalypse of the Civil War, and he very much wished to see himself as a founder and defender of the Second American Republic. In one lifetime of anti-slavery, literary, and political activism, Douglass was many things, and the set of apparent paradoxes makes his story so attractive to biographers, as well as to so many constituencies today. He was a radical thinker and a proponent of classic 19th century political liberalism. At different times, he hated and loved his country. He was a ferocious critic of the United States and all its hypocrisies, but also, after emancipation, became a government bureaucrat, a diplomat, and a voice for territorial expansion. He strongly believed in self-reliance and demanded an activist interventionist government at all levels to free slaves, defeat the Confederacy, and to protect black citizens against terror and discrimination. Douglass was a serious constitutional thinker, and few Americans have ever analyzed race with more poignancy and nuance than this mostly self-taught genius with words. He was a radical editor, writer, and activist. The book Frederick Douglass by David Blight.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Jefferson Smith. You're you. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. We've been talking about Medicaid expansion and the impact on human life on the states that did expand Medicaid, that did provide basic health care to its people, versus the impact on human life in those states that did not. And the separation, when you look at the map of where those states are, it's not entirely the Confederate South, but it resembles hauntingly the Confederate South. And we had a chance to discuss the impact of that, and now we have a chance to take your calls. Let's start with Tina from Toledo. You're on the, excuse me, Tina, I screwed that up.
No, you didn't.
Oh, Tina, go ahead.
Yeah, Tina from Toledo, you got it spot on,
Go
as
ahead.
usul. Jefferson, I just want to say thank you. You're the greatest substitute teacher I've ever had when Tom is gone.
I appreciate that.
So thank you. I don't want to disrespect your topic, so just a quick maybe statement on on health care. My husband has had a fantastic job. We've been very blessed, very lucky, however you feel. He's been at his job for 45 years and has fantastic health care. And I was one of those 20, 30, and 40-year-olds shaking my fist saying, don't you dare touch what my husband has. And then now, all of a sudden, we're looking at each other. He's going to be retiring in 2 years, and we're going, oh, my gosh, what are we going to do? What are we going to do?
Yeah.
So I just want to make the statement that everybody who is clamoring, saying, don't take away what I have, I just want to say, you're not going to be employed forever, so be thoughtful of that.
And Tina, it's such
a...
No, finish your point. Didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
But that was just a quick, because I didn't want to disrespect your topic. My actual thought was because it's Veterans Day. My son is a veteran from Afghanistan, young guy, just turned 30, and Thursday, when I read that our president of the United States of America put his hand on the Bible, swore under oath in a court of law that he did indeed steal money out of his own charity for veterans and for other charities. We need to absorb that. We need to think about that. He did it for his own political benefit, and he did it for his own personal benefit. These things, and I don't understand why the media, especially on this wonderful day, is not saying why. How can we be so complacent in what's going on with the impeachment when the man was willing to take from a charity? And I just wanted to get your thoughts. And thank you so much for being there.
No, Tina, thank you so much. And I'll offer two thoughts. One, in addition to thank you, on your first comment about, people lose the health care. I don't know, and for the people clamoring because they want to keep it, my own reading of the tea leaves for what it is, my own analysis of what's going on. I don't know that people are clamoring, first of all, to keep their health care. I think people are scared, and that they're scared of losing something with the uncertainty of what they might get. And therefore,
you're very, very correct.
That's my impression. And I think a good point that can be made is that under Medicaid expansion or Medicare for all, under a single payer system, people would be able to keep their doctor under, and they'd be able to do that better. They'd be able to do that better because if everybody had the same insurance policy, well, you wouldn't be moving around from plan to plan, so you wouldn't be moving from doctor to doctor unless you wanted to. Under the current system, you can lose your doctor the same way you can lose your health care. People are at risk at this very moment, and I think the fear of change can get us to hold on to a status quo that kind of sucks. But to your other point, why is the media not talking enough about Trump's corruption with charity? I'm not sure, except I'm sure about a few things. I know there is no equivalency to Fox News, and any attempt to suggest that CNN, MSNBC, or anything else like that is similar to Fox on some other side is a entire misreading of the media landscape, that there is not a contravailing propaganda arm. And most of the listeners of the Thom Hartmann Program, for instance, aren't that interested in propaganda. I've had a chance to listen to you and talk to you folks now for a couple of years, and we have smart listeners that care about stuff, care about truth, care about what's happening in the country, want democracy to function. We're wrong about some stuff, share some views about some things, but there isn't that same echo chamber. So every time I hear a Trump story, every time I hear an impeachment story, and shout out to Vox for doing some good coverage over the weekend, it is a Fox News story. It is a right-wing talk radio story. As I've said before, he is not the head of the snake, he's a rattler. And if you cut off the rattler, another will grow back. That we have to think about what is actually the snake, and that includes, and in many respects is driven by, the most propagandistic media enterprise that this country has ever seen. Let's go to Tyrone in Harlem. Go ahead, Tyrone.
Thanks for taking my call.
Appreciate you.
All right. What baffles my mind is the fact that they say Medicaid for all is a pipe dream. I say everything is a pipe dream until it becomes reality. George Washington had a dream that this country would be independent from England until it actually happened. So if we don't work extremely hard to make this a reality as far as Medicaid for all, it won't happen. So the thing that, when you said people are afraid of change, you're absolutely right. But you also got the fact that people are, we got so many people that are hateful, that are working against the best interests of the American public to suit their own satisfaction, like with Mitch McConnell, when he said, I don't care if this thing helps the American people, we are not going to go for it. That's true. That's pure cruelty. They say that's politics.
Yep.
But I don't see it just as politics. I see you are actively, even now, to this day, he is actively killing passage of the bills from the Democrats because just out of pure hatefulness, which will be beneficial actually for Trump to pass some more bills.
It could help him politically if he passed some more bills. Agreed. And let's go. I want to amplify your point, or retweet it if I can. The march towards more universal health care has been part of the American political story for the last 70 years. And with the dawn, and each time when Truman started it, when Truman tried, it has been thwarted. It has been thwarted by the American Medical Association. And when it looked like it was going to happen, when Democrats were in control of the presidency and Congress, the tool that was used in order to beat it back was, in fact, racism. The 1619 Project the New York Times did help tell this story well. And when you then look at this map of the states that turned out Medicaid expansion, and you see how well or how awfully it coincides with the states of the Confederacy, you realize, what is holding us back as a country is, in fact, division. What is holding us back from having shared compassion, from having lives where people have a little bit greater chance actually living a good life and staying alive, and if they get sick, getting a chance to see a doctor. What is keeping us from something that the vast bulk of people would like to see happen? We can argue about methods, but the vast bulk of people would like to make sure that if somebody gets sick, they get to see a doctor. That what has kept us from doing that was first the greed of the healthcare industry, and then that greed being able to use race as a divider to make sure that the vast body politic didn't overwhelm that greed. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like a MAGA hat? Does that sound like build a wall so we don't have to protect Social Security, don't have to protect Medicare, don't have to protect Medicaid, certainly don't have to expand those things? That we call the healthcare system Obamacare, named after a black president? That the Republicans start calling it like that so that they can use a trigger word, so that they can use a dog whistle word to make sure that they can get 12 states, instantly say, we're not going to do that stuff? Because we've been still fighting the Civil War and hoping to win it. And if we can't win it on the battlefield, which we didn't, if our traitorism isn't going to win then, on Veterans Day, let's think about what veterans actually stand for. If you're a veteran for the Confederacy, you are not a veteran, you're a traitor. And now, because that traitorous move was not successful, well, we'll just keep poor people from getting health care. Oh, but wait a minute. There's all kinds of poor people. Poor people aren't just people of color. Those 15,000 people who died needlessly, those weren't all people of color. Those certainly weren't people who came across a border recently. We're going to be back in just a minute. I appreciate you being here. And if you do have shouts out to service, if you do want to give a shout out, and it doesn't have to be military service, if you want to give a reminder or remembrance on this day, and that's why I have the honor of sitting here, is because it is Veterans Day and because Tom is taking a well-deserved respite, that if you have something you want to make sure we remember, please feel free to call. The call-in number is 202-808-9925, 202-808-9925. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a little bit. But as we think about what we serve, and as we connect it to Tina's call, when Tina was talking about, why isn't the media talking about corruption in the White House, talking about misusing charity, including to benefit military families for personal benefit. As we think about what the presidency is supposed to stand for, it's supposed to stand for service. What does service mean? How can we serve one another? We'll be back. This is Tom's Show. I'm Jeff.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We're going to be right back with Tom's Show. I'm Jefferson Smith. Rudy from Atlanta, you're on the air.
Hey, Jefferson, I've always thought that you're the best step-in relief pitcher available, and I appreciate you.
I'm trying to graduate to understudy, Rudy. I mean, this might be the day. I was not going to introduce myself as an understudy, but anyway, keep going.
Well, hey, man, you know, you said something while I was on the line, and you're so right. Donald Trump is just a rattler. He's just a clown, just throwing out everything, just trying to distract. Let's really think about who's behind supporting this guy. Well, now, how is it that you cannot want someone to have health coverage? That's a community thing, dude. When my neighbor is healthy, I don't have to worry about them catching whatever virus that is out there that can spread.
Yeah, you want them to be healthy because you don't want to get the stuff they got.
Right. You know, I mean, this is sickening, Jefferson. This is sickening.
No,
I'm
with you.
We really have to break this code. This because it's all hatred driven. I mean, and we're so much better together.
Amen.
We're so much better together.
And
I mean, I can talk. I mean, it's just so many things. There's so many things that I can express, but we are so much better together.
And I'm so glad you bring it back, Rudy, to the first principle, because this argument has been for so long, like the dominant argument that has helped develop the right wing, but essentially it's a cult. And I don't use that. I use that term because it's the only way I can make sense of it. I'm not even trying to cast aspersion. It's just the only way I can make sense of it. That if you, this dominant argument has been if you reward the powerful at the expense of the powerless, everything else is going to work out. Right? Give tax cuts at the highest income levels, and then stuff will just happen good for everybody else. And what you raise is the converse of that. That if we worry about everybody, that benefits each of us. That if you make sure everybody is healthy, I'm less likely to catch a communicable disease, and I am more likely to be able to still have my job because everybody else, because my employer isn't sick, or because I'm not sick, or because my coworkers aren't sick, so I can still do it. That I benefit if everybody benefits. Not the opposite of that merely, but that thing is such a great reminder, Rudy.
Each one take care of each. I mean, it blows my mind, man, to hear people say, what you said, someone said, well, I don't want the Mexican to have it. What?
Yeah, that caller didn't stick around. I was anticipating that caller, but that caller gave up the ghost, didn't keep going. Bill from Sebastian, Florida. I hope I got that pronunciation right in Sebastian.
Yes. How you doing, Jefferson?
It's good to hear your voice. I'm doing well.
This is no more than an extension of the caucus room when all the Republicans down there in Washington decided not to back anything that Obama did. It's depraved indifference to common sense. It's depraved indifference to minorities and poor whites in this country. It's been going on since Reagan got into office back in 1980, and it's continued. And Medicare for all is the only way to go, and that's why I'm supporting Bernie.
Well,
all right,
Bill,
thanks a lot, Jefferson.
Really appreciate the call. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff. Hello, everybody. You might not know the name Julie Briskman, but you have seen her picture. A picture of a woman on a bicycle riding next to a motorcade and defiantly giving the finger of scorn to that motorcade and to the president. That woman lost her job after doing that. Her name was Julie Briskman. She just got a new job. Here to talk to us about Julie Briskman's new job is, in fact, Julie Briskman. Hello, Julie.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining the show today. So I want to make sure I didn't get any of that background wrong, first of all, so you can add to the background. Then after that, I want to ask you about the new job that you got. But did I get that background right, or what details did I miss?
No, I mean, I think you pretty much got it correct. Once that photograph of me flipping off the motorcade went viral, I was fired from my government contracting position almost immediately. And the story came out about who I was and why I was fired about a week later. And then everything started happening.
What prompted you? May have had to answer this question a million times just recently, given the new job that you just got, which we'll explain in just a moment. But I've never had a chance to hear the answer, and I'll bet you most of our listeners haven't either. When you decided to flip off the president, when you decided to flip off the motorcade, what was going through your head?
Well, what was going through my head initially was like, oh, yeah, there he is. He's been golfing again today. The golf course is literally less than a mile from my home. It's actually in my district now. But and it was, the hateful rhetoric, the treatment of Puerto Rico after the hurricane. They didn't have power. It was the treatment of immigrants and just the entire attitude toward, him actually having the highest office in the land and not paying attention to the issues at hand.
And you flip off the president on a bike, not probably thinking much of it, right? Thinking, this is maybe not even an act of defiance, but just an act of frustration. And then at some point, you learn that people like me have seen your picture. When did you start figuring out that this picture was being seen by a whole lot of people?
So I didn't figure it out. So that was a Saturday afternoon I took that bike ride, and I didn't know that the picture had gone viral till about 10 or 11 o'clock the next day on a Sunday. I was kind of lying low. I was in recovery from running a marathon, so I wasn't, I wasn't talking to too many people. I just went for my bike ride to try and shake things out. And, I don't think that so many people have an opportunity to be that close to the president and really, to give him a piece of their mind. So I was kind of happy to have that opportunity that day.
And then you learn, and then somebody in your life says, oh, by the way, or you see it yourself. How did you learn that the picture was sweeping the nation?
So a friend of mine had recognized me, and she texted me the picture and just said, I'm so proud of you. I happened to be wearing my running group's shirt, so that she recognized me pretty quickly. And then when did you find out you lost your job? How'd that conversation go down? So over that weekend, another place that I worked part-time in the community had started to get threats and nasty grams and people saying that how could they have someone like me on staff. So this local business was having trouble already. Even though my name wasn't even really out there, people in the community knew who I was. Because it wasn't a picture of your face. It was a picture back of your head. Yeah, it's a picture back of my something. But body, anyway, so and then I also had one or two folks from the media call me. So I went in on Monday to my place of employment, the HR office, and I said, listen, I don't know if you've seen this picture, but this is me, and another employer is getting threats, and the media has called me. I wasn't quite sure, don't know if I'm going to talk to them, but I just wanted to let you know. And the HR lady said, oh, you're fine. You're allowed to ride your bike. Don't worry about it. Just don't talk to the media on company time. And I said, fine. I went home on Monday, and the next day was Halloween. I went back in. Within 24 hours, I had been fired. Okay. So you lose your job, and you decided to apply for another job. And it's not the way that everybody applies for every job. Talk about the job that you decided to apply for, and we'll get into that. Absolutely. So several days after my story went public, Chairwoman Randall asked me to run for this seat. There's an 8-year incumbent that was sitting in this seat, and the district, her values just didn't match the values of her district anymore. So, the election was a ways off, so I didn't give a final answer, but I just said, okay, I know I'm going to be active. I mean, on my way home, basically from getting fired, I decided I'm not going to get silenced. This is another effort to silence the resistance to this administration. I'm not going to be silenced. I signed up to work the polls. I rejoined the Democratic Party. I started helping. We had a big congressional race here to unseat another, Tea Party Republican in our congressional district. I helped her with her campaign, Jennifer Wexton. We got her into office in 2018, but around August of 2018, I decided, okay, I'm going to run. I went and worked for that campaign to make sure I understood what it took to do that. And then I decided to run in 2018. We had a great slate it helped that we had a great slate of candidates running for board seats. We have 9 board seats and an awesome slate of candidates. We were just, the blue wave was coming through at the local level, and I was really happy to be a part of that.
And you defeated a former Republican. And what are your duties now in the new role?
Yes, so I did defeat an 8-year Trump-supporting Tea Party conservative.
Which are words you probably said more than once on the campaign trail.
Maybe a little bit, but, I would maybe not have run for this seat, right, if there was a strong Democrat sitting there. That played into my decision. But anyway, so the Board of Supervisors, there's 9 of us, 8 districts, and an at-large seat. And the 2 big things that we do is land use decisions. Our county is, it's kind of a suburb of Washington, D.C., but we've grown from 90,000 people to more than 400,000 people since I've lived here in the last 20 years.
We're about to wrap. No, it's fine. I asked you that question a little bit too late. Where can people find out more about what you're up to, Julie Briskman?
I am at Julie, J-U-L-I, Briskman on Twitter, and I have a website, briskmanforsupervisor.com.
And do you advise that people flip off presidents?
Well, I'm not going to answer that. People can make their own decisions about that.
Thanks for being with us. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. That's Julie. I'm Jeff. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Fred Kaplan's new book, The Bomb: Presidents, Generals, and the Secret History of Nuclear War. This is from the introduction. For 30 years after the Cold War ended, almost no one thought, much less worried, about nuclear war. Now, almost everyone is fearful. But the fear takes the form of a vaguely paralyzed anxiety. Because of the long reprieve from the bomb's shadow, few people know how to grasp its dimensions. They've forgotten, if they ever knew. The holiday from history began on August 8, 2017, when President Donald Trump, barely 6 months in office, told reporters at his golf resort in Bedminster, New Jersey, that if the North Koreans kept threatening the United States with harsh rhetoric and missile tests, quote, they will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen, end quote. Even those who didn't remember President Harry Truman's similar description 72 years earlier of the atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima, Truman said, a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. It was clear that in language more bellicose than any president since the end of World War II, Trump was talking about launching nuclear weapons at North Korea. Not if its leader, Kim Jong-un, first attacked the United States, but merely if he developed the ability to do so. Then, 6 months later, Trump signed and released his administration's Nuclear Posture Review, a 74-page document that called for building new types of nuclear weapons and integrating them with the military's conventional war plans. In short, for treating nuclear weapons as normal. The red lights flashed. The alarm bells rang furiously. Yet here is what few recognized. None of these notions were new. The president himself seemed a departure from the norm. His character, erratic, eruptive, thin-skinned, willfully uninformed, a combustive mix for a world leader with his finger on the button. But the button and everything around it were the same. In those decades when most of us chose to forget the bomb, as global tensions calmed and fallout shelters crumbled and we turned our gaze to other problems and pleasures, the nuclear war machine continued to rumble forth in the beyond top secret chambers of the Pentagon, the Strategic Command Headquarters in Omaha, the weapons labs in various parts of the country, and the think tanks whose denizens never stopped thinking about the unthinkable. They all kept at their singular task, wrestling with the dilemmas posed by the bomb's existence. How to deter nuclear war? How to fight a nuclear war if it cannot be deterred? How to win it if such a thing is even possible? This is the nature of the nuclear era, and the era never drifted into suspension, even if our attention did. Trump snapped us out of our slumber, reminded those of us who were old enough to know, and informed those who weren't, that the bomb is still here. In public over the years, officers and officials have described America's nuclear policy as a second strike deterrence. If an enemy strikes us with nuclear weapons, we will retaliate in kind. This retaliatory power is what deters the enemy from attacking us. In reality, though, American policy has always been to strike first preemptively, or in response to a conventional invasion of Allied territory, or to a biological or large-scale cyber attack. In any case, not just as an answer to nuclear attack. All of these options envision firing nuclear weapons at military targets for military ends. They envision the bomb as a weapon of war writ large. This vision has been enshrined in the American military's doctrines, drills, and exercises from the onset of the nuclear era through all its phases. Most presidents have been skeptical of this vision, morally, strategically, practically, but none of them have rejected it. Some have threatened to launch nuclear weapons first as a way of settling a crisis. The few who considered adopting a no first use policy, in the end, decided against it. There are rationales for these doctrines, drills, and exercises, and for the retention of the first use option. They are driven by policies, personalities, and bureaucratic rivalries, but also by a logic which, once its premises are accepted, hurls its adherents and the rest of us into a rabbit hole of increasingly bizarre scenarios that seem increasingly, if strangely, rational the deeper they're probed. Understanding the nuclear era, the era of our lifetime, means understanding the rabbit hole, who dug it, and how we got stuck inside. It means tracing the maze of its tunnels, which is to say the arc of its history. A story enmeshed in secrecy, some of it still secret, much of it now illuminated by declassified documents and interviews with key actors, though never fully told. How did we get to this second coming of nuclear panic? How did we wind up with thousands of nuclear weapons, far more than any war aims could justify? What propelled the nuclear arms race during the decades-long Cold War? And what happened to the weapons and their guardians after the Cold War ended? And how and why did any of this persist? Chapter 1, Killing a Nation. The book Fred Kaplan's The Bomb.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
In this rage, hatred, something that redeems us. The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jefferson Smith. Happy Veterans Day. Honored to sit in for Tom today and to be with you. What is a moderate? What is a centrist? What is the center of the American political debate? I remember 3 conversations. First one 15 years ago. I was working to raise money for the democracy nonprofit I was starting, and I was meeting with the son of one of the most storied, wealthy families in my town. Their family name adorned our leading theater. And during that conversation, I'll never forget this. He said, you know, most people, I was a pretty young guy, and most people, he was taking this opportunity to give me a political education. He did not, by the way, end up offering support for the organization. But you see, most people are socially tolerant and economically conservative. I remembered that. About 12 years ago, I was having a meeting with the leading real estate developer, maybe probably the leading real estate developer in my town. Running a nonprofit means fundraising. And we bumped into a wealthy gay activist in our town. And the governor's race came up. And the Republican who was running in the governor's race was a favorite of the Chamber of Commerce. And the person I was meeting with was warm to that notion. And they started talking about public employee retirement benefits, and they were talking about housing policy and tax policy. And the guy I was meeting with, the developer, was talking about the reasons he liked the Republican nominee. And finally, the wealthy gay activist, who was also in the conversation, or was on their side of the conversation, was trying to persuade him to vote for the Democratic nominee, said, but choice, someone's right to choose. Third story, about 9 years ago, I was having a conversation with a guy who was also very wealthy and had sold an aluminum company. This time I wasn't raising money. We were in a strategy meeting serving on the governor's steering committee. And he said, to win this election, we need to moderate. We need to go after those moderate voters, those voters in the middle. We got to be in the center. And at that point, I even questioned it. I said, well, who are the people you're talking about? Because I had an idea of the people he was talking about, and it was the people who used the Mac Club or the University Club or the Arlington Club, sort of the fancy places in our town. And as it went forward, I heard from the right-wing leaning libertarians their argument, thinking they were going to have their moment. They were sharing that viewpoint. Where people are is socially tolerant but economically conservative. And the libertarian, right wing, that was a funny slip, the libertarian right wing sort of takes an extreme view of that. And being a moderate in elections, particularly in general elections, particularly with editorial boards, particularly with campaign donors, is viewed as a virtue. Even just in the common parlance, well, as a moderate-minded person, reasonable person, different things, but I use them together. was viewed as a compliment. Extremist, not deemed a compliment. I want to give a shout out to Lee Drutman, who mapped out the 2016 vote on 2 dimensions. But keep in mind, and I'm not right now going to make the case of whether being a moderate is a good or bad thing. My argument is a little bit different. But most people want to see themselves as, at least in a vein, as moderate. Mirror neurons make us want to fit in with the tribe. Episodes of Survivor remind us not to be voted off the island. Schoolmates in the lunchroom give us fear of being a weirdo. Employers have some of the same incentives. If you flip off somebody, you flip off the president, maybe you get fired. That's not what a moderate person would do. Political incentives align similarly. When conservatives run towards their base, they are typically running towards their money. When Democrats run to their base in most races, they tend to be running away from their money, certainly away from their bigger donors. Similarly with the media. The media wants to be deemed as moderate in the main of the stream. Editorial board, one of the best ways to win an editorial board endorsement is to seem the moderate person running against the extremist. And legislative politics reward the same behavior. The Blue Dog Democrats, as an example, if you're the swing vote in a legislative chamber, you can exact concessions and shape the final result on a given issue when your vote is needed. I'm setting aside for a moment the debate of whether we should aspire to be a moderate. But the word has powerful advantages. And it begs the question, what do we mean by moderate? Lee Drutman mapped the 2016 election. And of course, I'm bringing this up because Mayor Bloomberg has entered, or looks to be entering, the presidential campaign. And his argument, well, we need a moderate. And the argument, whatever words he says, the argument about him, the clamor for a candidate to make sure that Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders is not the nominee, is, well, we need a moderate. And it begs the question, what do we mean by that? What is a moderate? And I would say that I think it goes back to what that wealthy guy told me 15 years ago, his definition of a moderate. If you ask most editorial boards, well, what we mean is socially tolerant and economically conservative. I think that's hogwash. I think that's one of the most important political lies and misunderstandings that the conventional wisdom holds in this century. And it happens again and again and again, and you see manifestations of it over and over again. And I would suggest almost every single weekend show that covers politics on any network, and many of your conversations. Oh, what's a moderate? Well, what they mean is they want lower taxes for rich people, but they don't want to put gay people in work camps. That's a moderate. Set aside whether or not we think being a moderate is good or bad. But I think what is hogwash is the way, and which is clearly hogwash to me, is how it is defined. And for this, I'll use data. Lee Drutman mapped out the 2016 election on 2 dimensions: opinions on social and identity issues and opinions on economic issues. That map created 4 quadrants, as they do when you have an x-axis and a y-axis. Those who were liberal on both dimensions, the lower left quadrant, who were liberal on social and identity issues and liberal on economic issues, that was the biggest quadrant with a bullet. 45% of the voters. 45% of the voters were liberal on both economic issues and on social and identity issues. The second biggest quadrant was not the conservative quadrant. That was the third biggest. The upper right-hand quadrant, conservative both on social and identity issues and conservative on economic issues, that comprised 23% of the electorate. The Howard Schultz quadrant, what may end up being the Mayor Bloomberg quadrant, the developer quadrant, the rich guy was trying to raise money from quadrant, the socially liberal, economic conservative quadrant, the moderate quadrant, the one that's in the middle, right? The one that the rich guy told me what everybody was. 4% of the electorate. 4%, the smallest one. It was actually that upper left populist quadrant, 29%, socially conservative and economically liberal, the opposite of what most of the parlance describes as moderate. Let's think about our language, how we describe things. If we're going to think about the future, how do we have a future that's not just left to right, but forward, and it actually moves forward?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We're going to be right back with your calls. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff. Todd from Columbus, Ohio, you're on the air.
Hi, Jefferson. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Hey, man, I'm calling about the opening. I know we're going back a little bit. I apologize for that. But
all good.
I'm doing that because I see your perspective on the show a little bit broader philosophically than Tom's approach, where he stays to constitutional theory. You tend to go into political philosophy a little bit broader. And your opening was, what is the purpose of government in light of Veterans Day? However, and that's an outward-looking perspective, but then your first guest focused on an internal issue, which was healthcare for all. Mm-hmm. So I think that kind of muddles the conversation by framing, it appeared as if the framing is an external perspective, but then you deal with an internal issue, and it kind of muddles the discussion a little bit, I'm afraid.
Well, we can embrace. Yeah, no, we can embrace the first question, actually engage it. Yeah, the first guest did not, and I guess wasn't even there really to answer the question I posed.
Right.
But rather, I posed that question just to think about if we adopt the purpose of government as to keep people protected, then what do we mean by protection? And then I wanted to answer that second question. But take a crack at it. When you think of the purpose of government, do you think that first purpose is to protect, or do you view it differently?
No, I think there are two purposes. You can have two different purposes simultaneously. One is an external purpose of protecting against external threats, mm-hmm. but the internal purpose is not going to be universal to all governments. It's going to be dependent on the type of government that you have. Mm-hmm. And since we have a democracy, we have something different than a dictatorship would have as its government's purpose. The dictatorship's purpose, of course, is to serve the dictator. Democracy is to serve the people. Mm-hmm. So in that case, justice is one of the first purposes, and how we achieve that justice then is what we need to look at.
What I actually, now that I hear you more, maybe I'm really glad the way that we did it, because so often when I hear somebody make the case, the purpose of government is to protect the people, what they mean by that is external purpose. Right? Its purpose is to build a wall or to build the military. And so I don't think it does disservice. In fact, I almost want to subvert that, because to me, how we actually protect people in the 21st century is less with a wall. And actually, invaders coming in and bonking us on the head is a much smaller concern than it was 600 years ago. And now the real threats I do fear, or I do think, are more nearby.
Yes, absolutely. But I think, again, you've got to consider what type of government you're talking about as far as what that purpose is internally.
Amen.
It really has a huge impact.
Yeah, fair point.
And so I just wanted to point that out, because I thought that it may have muddled the justification for healthcare for all by starting with that external focus.
Appreciate it. Todd, thanks for the call. Jill from Princeton, go ahead.
Well, Jefferson, wow, your last caller was pinpoint on point. Democracy for all. Demos, the people, Hachi rule. Move to Amend just celebrated 10 years of their movement, their grassroots organization, in lieu of Citizens United.
They're about to cut you off, so to finish your thought. Jill?
My grandfather was from World War II. He was a first paratrooper, and I want to let him know I love him.
Jill, thank you so much for calling. Thank you for that service and for your participation. And yeah, the move to amend celebrated its 10-year anniversary yesterday. We'll be right back. This is Tom Show. We're back. I'm Jefferson Smith. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. What's a moderate? And what's the purpose of government? And if it's to protect people, or if it is to promote justice, how do we think about that data that 19,000 people's lives were saved, at least, conservative estimate, because of the expansion of Medicaid, and 15,000 people's lives were lost because of the refusal in states, largely southern states, to refuse to block Medicaid expansion. We're taking your calls. We also had a chance to talk to Julie Briskman, who flipped off the president. And on the air is James, who I don't think liked that very much. Hey, James.
The fact that I don't like it is the fact that if I had done that to Obama, y'all would be in an uproar, of disagreement. And
I would be, absolutely. And one of the primary reasons is because I think we reap what we sow. And this president has demonstrated with his own conduct disrespect for the American people, disrespect for his supporters. I do view Julie's conduct differently than someone who treated Obama with scorn, because President Obama demonstrated every day and every week deep respect for humanity, including respect for opponents. Donald Trump has not demonstrated that respect. Do you disagree? Do you think that do you think that Donald Trump is worthy of that kind of respect? James, you there?
What did Obama do for Americans who were descendants of slavery? Nothing.
Oh,
He didn't
yeah.
do anything. So you want me to be so loud and boisterous over him, but he didn't do anything for me.
No, I wasn't. I
want the office to be respected. Like he would always sit there and say, "When y'all go low, we go high." That's what I want. And
So you want
really low.
All right, I hear you. I don't agree that the fact that we would have felt disrespect towards Obama in a different way than we feel it towards Trump is a reason, it should guide our conduct primarily. But I do think it's an interesting question about how we should treat this president. We haven't had the context of a president like this. It comes up when the president gets booed in the Ultimate Fighting Championship, or gets booed at a World Series game, or gets more cheered when he goes to the Deep South and he goes to Alabama, And how we should treat the presidency is a good question. And I think there's at least two easy points. One, in this country, if the right to speech is anything, criticizing our ruler is its primary virtue. So we should be allowed to do it. And the second thing is this sort of thing I was bringing up, which is, I don't know that I'd flip off the president, but this is probably the first president of my lifetime that I would sacrifice my life to change the occupant of the White House. If there were that I would give up just about anything I could if I thought that it would in fact make sure that we could restore democracy in that sense. I didn't feel that about George W. Bush, even though I think he's one of the worst presidents of all time. And without getting into a debate, and James, thank you for your call, but in a debate about the Obama White House, I think that question about how this president deserves to be treated is a mildly interesting question. And I really enjoyed talking to Julie. Mark, go ahead from San Francisco.
Yes, Jefferson, I wanted to talk about the Republican policies in general are killing Americans. With the lifting of regulations for water and air, Planned Parenthood closing those down, affecting women's health. Overall, their policies are destructive and really detrimental to the American people, and that's the story that's not being told today.
Appreciate you. Gary from Vancouver, go ahead.
Hi, Jeff. This is Gary. In reference to what Mark said, too, this is destroying the infrastructure. Jeff Bezos is worth $170 billion. If he were to spend $50 million of that dollars every year, it would take him 3,400 years to spend that. The reason, I don't understand why people can't live on $1 billion or have a maximum wage, because we have a minimum wage. We should have a maximum wage as well. But the reason that we don't have money to spend on schools, healthcare, and infrastructure and so forth is because our oligarchs own this kind of money. And it's just sitting offshore doing nothing. I don't understand it. I'm a Vietnam veteran with a Purple Heart. Your turn.
Thank you, Gary, for your service, and thank you for the call. Yeah, and I think you're in Washington State, not Seattle, but my understanding is that Bezos did just I guess more accurately, Amazon and a bunch of independent expenditure money just attempted to buy the city council, or at least a couple city council seats in Seattle. Have you been tracking that story?
I have not, but this is what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Why should we allow this to happen? These people that Matt was talking about keep voting against our own best interests and theirs, and yet they continue to do it.
It of course is the big thing that's going on. When I talk about trying to get past division, it is not to find a place in the center. It is to save democracy. And I think if you save democracy, to quote Larry Lessig, or to cite Larry Lessig, when we talk about the democracy reform stuff, and I think we are going to be talking about not only what happened in Seattle with Bezos' attempt to buy a city council race or city council chamber, and also, by the way, Bezos talking to, and I guess persuading, pushing for Bloomberg to run for president, that I don't think that Mike Bloomberg is the greatest threat to democracy. I'm not even mad at the guy. I do think that gaping wealth disparities and the impact of gaping wealth disparities on our small d democratic process is tied for the greatest threat to America. And so I appreciate your phone call. We'll be back with more phone calls. Wow, the show is moving briskly. We appreciate you. The call number here is 202-808-9925. I'm Jefferson Smith, and thank you for everybody's service.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back. I'm Jeff.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is No Visible Bruises, What We Don't Know About Domestic Violence Can Kill Us by Rachel Louise Snyder. I'm reading from the preface. This is page 4. Suzanne and I exchanged small talk on her brother's driveway that day in 2010. She and the family were still in preparation and packing mode for their annual camping vacation into the hinterlands of Maine, and Suzanne had been greeted by her brother Andre with a long shopping list. She had told me she worked for a domestic violence agency in town and that they had recently developed a new program that she was calling the Domestic Violence High Risk Team. Their primary aim was simple, she said. We try to predict domestic violence homicides before they happen so we can prevent them. It sounded immediately implausible. So implausible, in fact, that I thought I'd misheard some elemental piece of it. Predict, I remember saying? You said predict domestic violence homicides? I had come across domestic violence in my reporting over the years, not only in Cambodia, but also in places like Afghanistan, Niger, and Honduras. But it had never been a focus for me. Instead, it was always adjacent to whatever other story I was writing, so much so that it was practically banal. The young girls jailed for love crimes in Kabul, the Indian child brides who gave interviews only in front of the men who controlled them, the Tibetan women forcibly sterilized by the Chinese government, the teenage brides in Niger cast from their villages after post-pregnancy fistulas made them pariahs, the Romanian women forced to give to birth multiple children under Ceausescu and who now in their early 30s were grandmothers fated to poverty, the Cambodian street workers beaten and gang raped for weekend sport by well-heeled Khmer teenagers. All of these women in every country were brutalized and controlled by men as a matter of routine. Men made the rules, primarily through physical violence. It was there, lurking in practically every story I'd ever covered around the world, a shadowy background so obvious I didn't even have to ask about it most of the time. It was as common as rain. Until that moment in the driveway with Suzanne Dubas, if I thought of domestic violence in the United States at all, I saw it as an unfortunate fate for the unlucky few, a matter of bad choices and cruel environments. A woman hardwired to be hurt, a man hardwired to hurt. But I never envisioned it as a social ill, an epidemic we can actually do something about. Now here was Susan Dubas talking about preventative measures for a type of violence that, for the first time, I saw operating along a continuum. The young girl in India married as a child, the Tibetan woman sterilized, the Afghan woman jailed, the housewife in Massachusetts brutalized by her husband. They all shared a common privation, what domestic violence victims across the world lacked: agency in their own lives. The forces that brought a Cambodian prostitute to the brink of death were the same forces that killed thousands of women and children and men, but mostly women and children, across America and the entire globe every year. An average, in fact, of 137 women each and every day are killed by intimate partner or familial violence across the globe, and this does not include men or children. Everything in my body suddenly came alive that day. I saw all the faces of women around the world from over 2 decades of work, and I realized how rarely I'd gazed inward at my own country, at what we got wrong and what it meant. The universality of domestic violence and how it crisscrosses geographical, cultural, and linguistic barriers. Maybe all those other stories were in preparation for the day that I'd meet Paul Monson and look at the mountains from his living room windows. I ended up following Suzanne to the farmer's market and then to the grocery store and then to the liquor store as she prepped for her camping trip. I helped her carry ice and peaches and hamburger meat. I asked question after question while she drove and while her mother Pat sat in the passenger seat, chiming in here and there. How did it work? How many have you stopped? What else can you predict? My questions were vast and endless. Like many people who hold a casual acquaintance with a problem, I believed all the common assumptions. That if things were bad enough, victims would just leave. That restraining orders solved the problem. And that if a victim didn't show up to renew a restraining order, the problem had been solved. That going to a shelter was an adequate response for victims and their children. That violence inside the home was something private, unrelated to other forms of violence, perhaps most notably mass shootings. That a lack of visible injury signaled a lack of seriousness. And perhaps most of all, that unless we stand at the receiving end of a punch, such violence had nothing to do with us at all. Over the next few years, Suzanne Dubas and her colleague Kelly Dunn patiently taught me about the scope and history of an issue that still today is too often hidden. I learned why past approaches had failed and what we could do more effectively today. Between 2000 and 2006, 3,200 American soldiers were killed. During that same period, domestic homicide in the United States claimed 10,600 lives. This figure is likely an underestimate, as it was pulled from the FBI's supplementary homicide reports, which gather data from local police departments, and participation is voluntary. 20 people in the United States are assaulted every minute by their partners. Former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan called violence against women and girls the most shameful human rights violation, and the World Health Organization called it a global health problem of epidemic proportions. A study put out by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime cited 50,000 women around the world were killed by partners or family members in 2017 alone. 50,000 women. The UNODC report called home the most dangerous place for women. The book No Visible Bruises by Rachel Louise Snyder.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Howdy, everybody. I'm Jefferson Smith. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. We're glad that you are. Raise the question, not only what the purpose of government is, or how do we think about protecting people. Also raise the question of what is a moderate? What is a centrist? In a legislative chamber in this century, run by lobbyists, run almost entirely by corporate lobbyists, because that's almost all the lobbyists are, who are there not advocating for the good of the order. That's not their job. Their job is to advocate for the interests of their client, almost entirely the financial self-interest of their client. That the moderate tends to be the person who's half sold out. That in the face of kleptocracy, in the face of rampant corruption, the definition of moderate tends to be half sold out. Just don't like to call it that. I have a different definition, at least if we think of moderation as a virtue. immoderation in the face of grave catastrophe, maybe no vice. Let's take Michael's call. Michael from the Bronx. Go ahead, Michael.
Hey, Jeff, how you doing?
Doing all right.
So I can help you with this a bit.
Please.
The actual thing of centrism and moderates probably be befitting to me because of someone that is an actual centrist, an actual moderate, will believe in equal accountability, equal rights, equal protection. The key word here is equality, straight down the middle. Now, I understand what you're saying about someone that could be half sold out, and believe me, I've seen it. Okay? I'm also even struggling since I'm a Christian. No way, shape, or form am I perfect, but I'm devoted to the church, believing in the teachings of Jesus Christ. It's all about peace, love, goodwill to one another, respecting the rights of others. However, there are those in the Christian spectrum that will claim to be Christian, but do everything opposite of what Jesus Christ has taught about peace, love, and goodwill to one another. How in the world can you call yourself a Christian and then you allow people to bring guns into a church and have a priest, a right-wing priest, bless those guns right in front of a blessed tabernacle that has Jesus Christ, as per Christian faith, Catholic faith, the symbol of life?
I couldn't agree with you more. And and it's something that I tend to talk about a bunch when I'm here, and at some point, if I'm back for an extended period, might want to do a series of guests on it. The subversion of the Christian faith. If you read the New Testament, heck, you read the whole Bible, and the number of times it says, help the poor, cure the sick, be a steward of the land, vastly dwarf any tenuous interpretation that one can find in the Bible for anything that resembles a right-wing playbook. But it is not new for Christianity being subverted, being stolen to do evil. It was the basis of manifest destiny, Christian teachings being used to justify racism through American history, Christian teachings teaching that black people are the sons of Ham and therefore subhuman, the post-millennialists versus the premillennialists, the Christian change agents, the Christian peace lovers, the suffragettes, the civil rights movers, the peace protesters, who said, no, Jesus Christ will return after 1,000 years of peace, until finally there was support, particularly in the South, for a different kind of theology, one that said, no, Jesus Christ will bring 1,000 years of peace after times of strife and war. We don't got to worry about good works. We don't got to worry about loving thy neighbor. We don't have to worry about curing the sick. We don't have to worry about helping the poor. We don't have to worry about being a steward of the land. All we have to do is pray, and then everything will be fixed when Jesus comes. That the Christian teachings in the South justifying slavery, somehow figuring out that the New Testament, that Jesus Christ as a teacher, that those teachings could be used to justify slavery and racism, and then later after that Jim Crow, was the kind of tenuous twisting that had to be done to maintain, by folks in the South, to maintain that social order. It is not a new thing for Christianity to be twisted to justify racism and division. And I appreciate your call, because I think most people are like you, and I don't mean Christian. I think most people are like you, that they think of themselves as reasonable. Most people, I mean, there's some, I know some, myself at moments, who think, no, I define myself in part because I'm unreasonable, because I'm willing to be different than other people. I'm willing to be distinctive. But most people, most of the time, want to fit in. They want to feel special, and they want to fit in. In Search of Excellence, who wrote In Search of Excellence? But he said humans have basically two basic needs: to feel special and to feel like they belong. Most people want to fit in. They don't want to feel like a weirdo. But then the definition of what a centrist is, I like your definition. Paul Wellstone's was being at the center of people's lives. Let's go to Donna from California. Hello, Donna.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm well.
I just had a reply to your question, and
Yeah.
I believe that they're there to protect the neoliberal status quo that has benefited the fortunate few. They are not fiscally conservative because they have no problem voting for thousands, millions, and millions of dollars for more war. They only draw the line on programs that benefit the average citizen. And I believe all of this, with many other factors, have helped bring in and usher in the Trump era. And it is just tragic beyond all measure. And that they put themselves out there as reasonable when clearly they are not. And that's really all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Donna, thanks so much for your call. Dave from Federal Way, Washington.
Yeah. Hey, Jeff.
Hey, Dave.
Hey, I want to agree with you. We all want to be moderate, right? Because we equate it to reasonable. All right, and you're talking about some deep biological stuff here. We all want to be reasonable. But the problem is moderate right now is really consideration of something that is distinctly un-American. And what I mean by un-American is it's against what the principles in which this Constitution was founded. Okay, and you're right by comparing it to the Old South. That's what happened there. I mean, you can just look at the works of like Frederick Law Olmsted, who wrote a book on the South before the Civil War. The problem is a large segment of the American population, those that we call conservatives, believe that if you're wealthy, you're immune from the law. And I saw a couple of things this weekend that just brought that home for me. One was a synopsis of Nikki Haley's book. It's called the name of it is I forget the actual name of the book is.
We don't even need to plug the name of her book. She can do that for herself.
The synopsis is where she says that Kelly, General Kelly,
right,
and Tillerson were trying to get her to be a secret resistance to Donald Trump.
Yep.
Okay, now it sounds good, but then she goes on to say that she does not believe that Donald Trump should be held to account for what he did with Ukraine because the actual money to the Ukraine flowed. Okay, it flowed, the defense money.
Yep.
So therefore, Donald Trump cannot be held responsible.
Yep.
Right. And see, that's the problem. If me or you or anybody else, all right, let's say we're going to steal a TV, but we fail in stealing it. All right, we fail. We are still going to be arrested.
Yep.
All right.
No, it's an old thing. Like offering to bribe a police officer is against the law. If the police officer doesn't accept the bribe and you don't pay the bribe, it doesn't mean that you didn't try to bribe a police officer. Right? That's kind of how it goes. Usually, if you try to bribe a police officer won't take the bribe, and that's how we want it. That's why we pay. That's why we pay police officers a living wage rather than paying what Liberia pays police officers, which is like $600 a month. And they expect bribes there. We hope that we don't get the bribes here. It's not. We're only going to evict the people where the bribes actually happened. Dave, appreciate you, and I'll also say that I am not arguing in favor or against of moderation or centrism. I'm willing to have that argument. I'm willing to have that debate. But at this moment, I'm setting that aside. We can have, what's moderate on slavery? Just like we'll enslave a few fewer people. What's a moderate on corruption? Just like half buy off people. What's a half on the right to vote? Well, some people get it and some people don't. But my real argument is just the definition of moderate is totally wrong. I was going to say a word that wasn't FCC appropriate. The media definition of moderate is totally inaccurate, and I'm hoping for the Thom Hartmann community, this community that I am so honored and proud to be a part of today, to start advocating for this when you hear it, when you see it on TV. The moderate quadrant that they think they're talking about, the one of the rich lobbyists that I was talking to, which is socially tolerant and economically conservative. It's, we don't want to expand Medicaid to a whole bunch of people. We don't want to have high taxes on rich people. We don't want anything like a wealth tax or Medicare for all, right? But we're okay with, same-sex marriage. That is the dominant view of what moderate means in government and in the media in the 20th and 21st century. But if you look at the quadrants of the Drutman quadrants, the map of where people actually are, that's only 4% of the American people. It's basically just like some country club folks and a few friends. That's not where most people are. The definition of moderate is different than that. You can use Wellstone's, the center of people's lives. Mine is democracy. The center is how do we figure this out together? Thanks for being with us together. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with your calls on the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff. We're back on the Thom Hartmann Program of Free Speech TV. Belinda from Detroit. Go ahead, Belinda.
Hi. I think that we need to change our whole nomenclature.
Go ahead.
This moderate and being centrist and all of that. I don't want to be moderate. I don't want to be liberal. I don't want to be any of that. I want to be an extremist. And I think people who want to get things done are the extremists, because you fight to the bitter end to get what you need done. And I think what we need done now are a whole lot of things. We need civil rights. We need human rights. We need medical rights. We need all of those things. And if we sit there and play this name game about I'm in the middle, I'm on the right side, I'm on the left side, we're getting nothing done.
Preach,
Martin Luther King was an extremist, and people called him one because he wanted rights for not just black folks, but all people who were denied their rights. He understood that it's more about the economics. So I think this is what we need to be dealing with. We need more extremists, and stop being afraid of all the names that people want to call you. I remember when I was in the union and chief steward here in the state of Michigan.
Auto workers? You're in Detroit. Auto workers union?
No. State workers.
State workers.
We were unionized.
Got it. Okay.
And people did not like me. I didn't care whether they liked me or not. But guess what? When the boss got in after them, guess who they called? They called on Belinda. I did over 200 grievances and never lost one.
200 to nothing. 200 to nothing is a good record, Belinda.
It absolutely is, and that didn't include the arbitrations that we had to go to, because I was the steward for the union leadership.
I want to get back to the point that you were making, because I don't know if I could agree with many things more. I might have a minor quibble on the extremist thing, but mostly vast agreement with that also. But there is so much emphasis. The superstructure of the political conversation is damaged. It is inaccurate. It's false. What I heard you say was, well, let's just try to do the most good. And the person who's trying to do the most good is the most good, is doing the most good. They're not the most weirdo. They're doing the most good. And when we as activists, when we as human beings, when we in government, we as voters, we as political parties, we as organizations, unions, however we congregate, work to do the most good, that's us working to do the most good. And trying to say, well, I only want to do half as good, yeah, it's kind of silly. And I think even within that superstructure, even within that flawed debate, there's flaws embedded within it. And that's the thing that I'm wanting to disrupt a little bit. I'm wanting us to watch how we talk about things. Because, yeah, I think this idea that, since I have a right hand and a left hand, therefore everything must be roughly equivalent, is a tool of oligarchy, is a tool of tyranny. We have to rethink how we organize our people. And we're back. I'm Jefferson Smith. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Happy Veterans Day. And thanks to all who serve. Brent from Columbus, who I think has a quibble. Go ahead, Brent.
Well, I don't know if it's a quibble. I would like to thank your previous caller there, Belinda, for her service as a local union. Stuart, that's awesome. I, too, was a local union president, United Steelworkers 1-777. So I think that's fabulous. I want to thank her for that. But the idea that the moderation is bad, I don't think so. Moderation is always the position of logic and rational thought. For example, courage is a moderate position. It's the position between recklessness and cowardice. If you have a position that is either reckless or cowardice, you're probably not going to be doing the most good. Moderates always do the most good. And I think in a political sense, it's the value of society and civil structure above civil disobedience that ends up resulting in sometimes death and destruction for people.
So even your definition...
That's not a good thing.
Yeah, even your definition, and Belinda's argument, not everybody had a chance to catch that. Belinda's argument was, screw this moderate stuff. I want people to be extremists. The people who do the most good are extremists. I think we should be rewarding extremism. Although I preface it this way because I thought the debate would err in this direction. But my point was less that whether moderate is good or bad, but just how we define it. And I heard your definition, which is it's the space between recklessness and cowardice. Was it Heifetz? I forget who Heifetz's co-author was, who said that their definition of leadership, Leadership on the Line, I think it was the title of their book. And this definition of leadership is disruption at a rate that can be absorbed. And that's probably in that space you're talking about between recklessness and cowardice. But what I'm just saying is whether or not we view it as a virtue or a vice, I think depends in part on our definition. I like your definition. But currently, the definition is in most of the political parlance. You could disagree with this and correct me if I'm wrong. But the way I hear the world is when most people talk about moderate, they mean the corporate Democrat. They mean the person who agrees with the corporate lobbyist more of the time, not the person, and I have my own definition that I'll offer, but not the person who's merely trying to find the place between recklessness and cowardice, but the person who's trying to find a midway point between political extremes, or the person who's trying to find the political safety area, not the person who's trying to do the most good. Feel free to take the last word.
I think that oftentimes that's what political moderates are trying to do. They're prioritizing re-election over their own principles and values. That, of course, is not courage. That is cowardice. That is certainly not my definition of moderate. So I think that you're correct in your analysis. It is you're describing what I would describe as cowardice and calling it moderate.
Brent, appreciate you. And that I want to capture that quote and keep it for posterity. Let me give you my virtue. And I'm somebody who grew up thinking, I kept my hair short. I studied in school some of the time, and I viewed myself as a moderate person. As I analyze that now, I now just think where we locate ourselves on a particular, and let me also dismiss or acknowledge some people conflate and some people combine centrism and moderation. Moderation a little bit more like our caller was just defining it, which was the space between recklessness and cowardice, and centrism being finding a space between two midpoints. Mostly in the parlance, I don't think there is as careful a delineation between those two things. But as activists, as we just try to do the most good, where we locate ourselves somewhere on a political spectrum is beside the point, and then often destructive. And then the little point I'm trying to make today, I'm trying to shout about a very small point, but it's a big mistake that the conversation is making, that the political discussion is making, that the conventional wisdom has, which is defining moderation, defining centrism as what's cool in the country club, what rich people think in their, local rich people gathering place, in their boardroom, that what they can agree on is the definition of moderate. It's not. It's maybe the dumbest definition of moderate we can come up with. It's a definition of moderate among oligarchs. It is not useful for democracy. But let me leave you on this point with with this argument in favor. This is where I like about moderation in its purest form. It's the story of the babysitter and the orange. Babysitter babysitting two kids. They both want an orange. And they go to the babysitter and say, I want an orange. And the household only has one orange. What's the babysitter to do? Well, most people know the answer. Cut the orange in half. Give each kid half. Well, it turns out that the little boy wanted the peel to make a pie. And the little girl wanted the meat of the orange to eat. And if the babysitter had asked the questions of what they really wanted, could have given 100% of what each of them wanted to both of them. It's Pareto optimality, Pareto superiority. It's giving greater benefit without costing other folks. I do think we leave good on the table. We leave money on the table. We lose opportunities to do more good because we fail to try to satisfy more interests. That only war making, even political war making, only arguing, political power grabbing, that is not the same thing as problem solving. And in problem solving, we do want to care about the interests of everybody involved as best we can, as long as their interests are not immoral and only power-grabbing interests themselves, only corrupt motivations themselves. And that is a virtue. And that is a thing that the media should trumpet and lionize. That is a thing that as voters we should appreciate. A problem is I think we are conflating that with just splitting the orange in half, no matter who it is wants whatever it is. That if we're in the face of corruption, well, because Republicans said so, I guess it's only half corruption. Because the president really wanted to get Ukraine to investigate the last vice president, well, maybe he's half right. Well, I guess the right wing says climate change isn't real, so I guess it's only half real. Well, wealth disparities must only be half important. Well, real rights for everybody in America must only be half a priority. They should be full priority. We'll be back. This is the Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Fred Kaplan's new book, The Bomb: Presidents, Generals, and the Secret History of Nuclear War. This is from the introduction. For 30 years after the Cold War ended, almost no one thought, much less worried, about nuclear war. Now almost everyone is fearful. But the fear takes the form of a vaguely paralyzed anxiety. Because of the long reprieve from the bomb's shadow, few people know how to grasp its dimensions. They've forgotten, if they ever knew. The holiday from history began on August 8, 2017, when President Donald Trump, barely 6 months in office, told reporters at his golf resort in Bedminster, New Jersey, that if the North Koreans kept threatening the United States with harsh rhetoric and missile tests, quote, they will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen, end quote. Even those who didn't remember President Harry Truman's similar description 72 years earlier of the atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima, Truman said, a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth. It was clear that in language more bellicose than any president since the end of World War II, Trump was talking about launching nuclear weapons at North Korea. Not if its leader, Kim Jong-un, first attacked the United States, but merely if he developed the ability to do so. Then, 6 months later, Trump signed and released his administration's Nuclear Posture Review, a 74-page document that called for building new types of nuclear weapons and integrating them with the military's conventional war plans. In short, for treating nuclear weapons as normal. The red lights flashed. The alarm bells rang furiously. Yet here is what few recognized. None of these notions were new. The president himself seemed a departure from the norm. His character, erratic, eruptive, thin-skinned, willfully uninformed, a combustive mix for a world leader with his finger on the button. But the button and everything around it were the same. In those decades when most of us chose to forget the bomb, as global tensions calmed and fallout shelters crumbled and we turned our gaze to other problems and pleasures, the nuclear war machine continued to rumble forth in the beyond top-secret chambers of the Pentagon, the Strategic Command Headquarters in Omaha, the weapons labs in various parts of the country, and the think tanks whose denizens never stopped thinking about the unthinkable. They all kept at their singular task, wrestling with the dilemmas posed by the bomb's existence. How to deter nuclear war? How to fight a nuclear war if it cannot be deterred? How to win it, if such a thing is even possible. This is the nature of the nuclear era, and the era never drifted into suspension, even if our attention did. Trump snapped us out of our slumber, reminded those of us who were old enough to know, and informed those who weren't, that the bomb is still here. In public over the years, officers and officials have described America's nuclear policy as a second strike deterrence. If an enemy strikes us with nuclear weapons, we will retaliate in kind. This retaliatory power is what deters the enemy from attacking us. In reality, though, American policy has always been to strike first preemptively, or in response to a conventional invasion of Allied territory, or to a biological or large-scale cyber attack. In any case, not just as an answer to nuclear attack. All of these options envision firing nuclear weapons at military targets for military ends. They envision the bomb as a weapon of war writ large. This vision has been enshrined in the American military's doctrines, drills, and exercises from the onset of the nuclear era through all its phases. Most presidents have been skeptical of this vision, morally, strategically, practically, but none of them have rejected it. Some have threatened to launch nuclear weapons first as a way of settling a crisis. The few who considered adopting a no first use policy, in the end, decided against it. There are rationales for these doctrines, drills, and exercises, and for the retention of the first use option. They are driven by policies, personalities, and bureaucratic rivalries, but also by a logic which, once its premises are accepted, hurls its adherents and the rest of us into a rabbit hole of increasingly bizarre scenarios that seem increasingly, if strangely, rational the deeper they're probed. Understanding the nuclear era, the era of our lifetime, means understanding the rabbit hole, who dug it, and how we got stuck inside. It means tracing the maze of its tunnels, which is to say the arc of its history. A story enmeshed in secrecy, some of it still secret, much of it now illuminated by declassified documents and interviews with key actors, though never fully told. How did we get to this second coming of nuclear panic? How did we wind up with thousands of nuclear weapons, far more than any war aims could justify? What propelled the nuclear arms race during the decades-long Cold War? And what happened to the weapons and their guardians after the Cold War ended? And how and why did any of this persist? Chapter 1, Killing a Nation. The book Fred Kaplan's The Bomb. Years later, it's Khrushcheva and Jeffrey Taylor.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program, and I'm Jefferson Smith, and happy Veterans Day. A little bit of change of gear. A little bit of, well, I guess we'll call it Good News Monday. As we think about much of how we spend our political time, which is critiquing the current occupant of the White House, let us not avoid both broader and deeper, as well as very specific conversations about change that can be made. And I want to talk to somebody right now who is addressing something very specific that impacts something very, very broad and deep. It's Mara Cepeda. She's a CEO and co-founder of Switchboard Incorporated. And she joins us now to talk about how could we think about a different way for companies to exit. The topic we're going to be using, the example rather we're going to be using is the example of Meetup. But I think it is emblematic or indicative or maybe a sign of just a different way of understanding our economy and how we should be thinking about pathways for companies, including tech companies. Mara, thank you so much for joining us from Massachusetts. Mara, are you there? So they work to get Mara. The article I'm referring to is Meetup to the People, how a zebra, and apparently it is zebra, not zebra, could rise from a unicorn's fall. Meetup was an organization that spawned.
Hello?
Oh, Mara, you're there. Go ahead, Mara.
Hi, sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Are you able to hear me?
I can hear you now, indeed. It's good to have you.
Great.
Well, you can tell the story rather than me doing it. First of all, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Give people the background on Meetup as to kind of lay the groundwork.
Sure. Meetup was founded in the days after September 11th. The founder, Scott Hefferman, really saw that communities were coming together in a very special way to support one another. They were turning towards each other. And it was that premise that he saw after September 11th that really catalyzed and inspired him to start the platform. So the platform is incredibly special. It has millions of users all over the world, and they are actively connecting around civic issues to strengthen civil society, voting, democracy, crafts, arts, social justice, any type of meetup you could possibly imagine. And so over the last almost 2 decades...
Yeah, I remember it. I thought it was a Howard Dean campaign thing. I remember it in 2004 as the way all the Deaniacs were getting together.
Yeah, I mean, it was very much used. That was one of the main marquee ways that it was used. And I think that was the first time that many people got to see just the potential.
Anyway, keep going.
Oh, yeah. So, meetups are now, there's about between, something like 13,000 meetups every single day that are happening all around the world. And this is so necessary as we think about the echo chamber of social media and all of the ills that have been born from that phenomenon. Meetup is really the antidote and the counterpoint to a lot of what we all complain about is so wrong with social media, that in-person, face-to-face, trust-building exercise that bolsters community and actually brings people together with common cause and purpose. That gesture is core to democracy and civil society.
And so what is happening with Meetup now?
So about 2 years ago, Meetup, the platform, was purchased by WeWork. for those of you that haven't been following the WeWork story, it's a bit of an implosion, a massive overvaluation. It's now, I don't know if it's been officially categorized as a distressed asset, but the valuation has tanked. And so Meetup is now
and the CEO, Adam Newman, took a whole bunch of money, sold a bunch of stock, paid himself for a bunch of things right before it became clear the stock was going to tank, and now his workers are suing him, and people are comparing him to the current president of the United States. Keep going.
Yes, it was. Yeah, it was a real illumination of everything that's currently quite dysfunctional with startup and Silicon Valley culture and the way that we value and prize certain business models. So Meetup was acquired by WeWork about 2 years ago, and right now that WeWork is underwater and really trying to offload non-essential assets, I would say, it's selling some of the companies that it acquired, including Meetup. And so there's an opportunity right now for Meetup to actually exit to community. So, when we think about these big venture capital funded companies, they're looking for an exit. They're looking to make a lot of money for shareholders. Well, Meetup is really special because the primary user group are the organizers and the people that attend Meetups. They have a vested interest in seeing that platform continue to really serve its membership. And so there's talks about what it would look like for Meetup to exit to community. That is there a way that we could restructure Meetup so that it could be owned by the people that use it and leverage it, which are the organizers, the members, and the employees of the company?
Which I am fascinated by, because this idea, and I'm not going to say anything new that you didn't say, but hopefully I'll retweet you verbally, that so often, and I talk to folks who, created their business as young do-gooders, and then what am I going to do to sell it? And a friend of mine who now passed away, his company never made a profit, but he sold it to Amazon for, $50 million or something. That becomes the exit strategy for so many of these companies, including companies that want to be do-gooder companies, and that they end up just, feeding into oligarchy. And how ironic and how tragic that would be for Meetup as an example, but I think also maybe emblematic of what's happening in the economy generally. So how is this work? You're saying exit to community, which I want to say again, just so people start thinking about that as one option for a next step for a company. How would that work, or how might it be working now?
Well, I think there's sort of the immediate and long-term logistics. So on the immediate side, WeWork is hoping to sell Meetup as fast as possible. And so it would be remarkable to have a coalition of values-aligned investors come in and, initially just do the financing to extract Meetup from WeWork's clutches so that it doesn't get bought up by, just the highest bidder that may not have the best intentions at heart. And then once that initial financing is through, you can start to think about ways that you can align incentives so that the organizers and the people that are responding to meetups and attending meetups and the employees, you essentially create a modern day cooperative. Cooperatives are nothing new. All of us probably can think of a cooperative, whether that's our health food store or a carpet shop or whatever it might be in our local community. Co-ops are far more prevalent in Europe. But Nathan Schneider, Trevor Schultz, and others have been working for many years to think about what it would look like to have platform cooperatives, meaning how can we align the incentives of the users with the business model? So instead of us being treated as, just this endless stream of data that is to be extracted, how can we actually mutually benefit from these platforms? And so the platform cooperative movement was born, and it's really saying, look, these virtual assets, these technology platforms, they can be repurposed to become community platform co-ops where all of us then become shareholders of these companies. There are a number of companies that have started this way. There was just a gathering in New York City of the platform cooperative movement last week. I think there are something like around 100 different platform co-ops that are now in existence across all sorts of industries. But certainly Meetup, we believe, would be, if it managed to convert to this in this fashion, would be the largest platform co-op in existence if it decided that it was able to transition in that fashion.
And to give examples of why this, just sort of the simplest examples of why this could matter so much, you already talked about data harvesting for people who don't want to, who don't want just extra Cialis ads, who actually want to control their own data, who people who care about managing oligarchy. This could really help. What are the odds that this happens, Mara? And thank you so much for joining us.
Well, if you're out there and you're an investor or someone who's enlightened about what's at stake here and how Meetup could be such a phenomenal story, the Zebras Unite movement has been talking to some aligned investors. We would just
Let's
love
pause
to
for a
see
second. Stay with us. Stay with us after the break. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
You are listening to Thom Hartmann Program. How can we realign the incentives in the economy and have a more shared economy that works? We're going to be talking about that. We're back with Mara Zepeda from Brighton, Massachusetts, talking about how zebras can unite, how a zebra could arise from a unicorn's fall. And you were just saying what needs to happen or what are the odds of it happening. And I think you were saying, hey, anybody who's listening who is an investor type, you might want to get on board. But continue with your plug. I think what you're doing is fascinating and hugely important.
Yeah, I mean, I think, first of all, Meetup organizers, self-organize. If this is something that you want, have your voices be heard and start to organize, because I think that that's going to be so meaningful. Second, for people that are interested in civil society and democracy and just see the urgency of an asset like Meetup being owned by the most important stakeholders that are really its users, its organizers, its employees, get in touch. The email address is hello@zebrasunite.com. That's hello@zebrasunite.com. More generally, to all of your listeners, we just encourage you to learn more about online cooperatives, the platform cooperative movement, and different ownership structures. All of these digital assets that all of us use every day, they were designed to make shareholders wealthy by selling advertising and mining our personal data. But as we think about the future of technology, it doesn't have to be that way. And the first step to it not being that way is to come up with creative alternative ownership models that actually are aligned with the public's interest rather than treating us as an extractive, just extracting our information from us. So there is a potential to do this in the future, but it starts with different corporate structures and capital systems to align those incentives.
So first of all, if I were to go and email hello@zebrasunite.com, which, by the way, I was recently corrected by a woman of German descent that it's zebras. I'm not here to advocate, but I'm just passing along what I learned. So if I pronounce it funny, it's just because I don't want her to get mad at me. If someone were going to email that and say, hey, I want to help and put in some money, what would that mean? Is there actually a fund being developed? Is that still in the works? What's happening?
Well, right now we're looking for aligned investors, and we're trying to figure out what the appetite is.
Yeah.
So the timeline, as we understand it, is obviously pretty fast because Meetup is, WeWork is in a bit of a pickle, as those of us who know have been following the story. And so, I think our ambition here is twofold. On the one hand, it would be quite remarkable if we were able to find an exit to community for Meetup. Anyone that is interested in democracy should be looking at the asset of Meetup and should be thinking about how much it's going to impact society if that just falls into the hands of the highest bidder. We have a huge opportunity right now to take this asset and to convert it into a platform cooperative, which would be an incredible story. So there's right now, in this moment, this is what's possible, and we're really looking for people and visionary individuals and organizations that see the potential there for how much this could serve civil society and democracy as it has. And then moving forward, if we don't manage, this time around, for all of your listeners to just become aware that we are slaves to corporate structures. And so we need new corporate structures that liberate all of us, our data, our information, from the stranglehold of venture capital and the advertising model that's currently destroying the foundations of society. We have an opportunity to re-envision that future.
Preach, Mara. I know, folks, this might sound like nerdy stuff, but pick up what Mara is putting down. If we can change ownership structures, we can save America. Mara, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
I think she was going to say it was a pleasure. I'm not sure. I hope so.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
All right, bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
All right, folks, it's time for the speed round. In that last segment, we were talking about how do we change ownership structures. I want to say that email address again. It's hello@zebrasunite, or if you prefer, hello@zebrasunite.com. How do we have platform co-ops so that people can align the incentives with democracy and their own interests rather than just getting harvested? If we can change corporate structures, if we can change ownership structures, we can change America. If we can't change ownership structures, we got a real problem in trying to save America. Let's do a speed round. Folks have been waiting patiently. Let's try to clear the board, see how well we can do, and I'll try to abide by the speed round as well. Roger from Ojai, you're on speed round.
Thanks for taking my call. Pleasure to speak with you. I wanted to speak briefly on centrism as the politics of nothing. I have observed in my own experience that people who are centrist really don't believe much of anything. They're too fearful to take a firm side on either a conservative or liberal or whatever have you. And I think that's very bad. I think they need to come down on one side of the fence or the other. They just want to be so careful, go through things so slowly. And if they don't want to change things boldly, they don't want to change anything. Centrists typically want to move along so slowly that they don't change anything and nothing good gets done. So I don't think centrism is a good thing, and I think it's a kind of closet conservatism.
Lou, thank you so much, Roger, for that call. Lou, you're on from Pueblo.
Yes.
You're on speed round.
Oh, okay. Hey, good, Jefferson. Hey, I was just going to make a comment. I believe this centrist, liberal, whatever, these are all relative and fluid. They change with time. For example, if I was going to identify myself, I'm a bit to the left of Bernie Sanders and very much in alignment with the 1956 Republican platform. The 1956 Republican platform protects Social Security and extend it to all Americans, all ages. Continue and perfect assistance for people with employment problems, the handicapped, etc. Improve unemployment. Protect the assets of employee welfare and benefits so people get pensions. Assure equal pay for equal work regardless of sex. Federally assisted construction and a strong minimum wage for public supply contracts. Extend minimum wage to everyone. Continue to fight for the end of discrimination. Provide assistance for the economic conditions of areas that have high unemployment. Revise Taft-Hartley to protect more effectively unions and extend the union membership to as many workers as possible. That's a Republican platform. Today it would be called.
If you can get me a link, my Twitter handle is Jefferson D. Smith at Jefferson D. Smith on Twitter. If you can get me a link, I'll tweet that out because that is.
I have got your email address. I can send it there.
All right, appreciate it, Lou. We're on speed round.
Bye.
All right, take care. John from Sunland. John, you're on from Sunland, California. John, you there?
Yes.
Go ahead, John.
Yes.
You're on speed round.
Okay, I was calling on this Veterans Day to represent the Vietnam War protesters. It was the Vietnam War protesters that really were instrumental in stopping the war. And you asked, what is the purpose of government? Is it to protect the people? Well, you think about Kent State, and 4 people died. The National Guard killed 4 people at Kent State. Was that reckless? I mean, I don't know. Were they being reckless? They were just standing up for what was right. I don't know how if it's right to just kill people because the government made up lies to perpetuate the war in Vietnam or perpetuate the war in Iraq. What are your thoughts?
Well, my first thought is thank you, and I think it is really legitimate on Veterans Day to honor both those who have risked their lives in armed conflict and those who have questioned the morality of armed conflict or the wisdom of a given instance of armed conflict. And we should embrace both discussions. I guess this is speed round, so I'll leave it at that so I can get to Margie, or it might be Margie, at Wisconsin Rapids, Wisconsin.
Hi, I'd like to get back to our conversation that you started about healthcare.
Please.
And we need to start talking about the actual cost of health insurance. because it drives me crazy. They only talk about like our private health insurance. We also need to include the other ways that we are paying for this. Let's start with workman's comp. If you're injured on the job, your personal health insurance will not cover you. Let's talk about our automotive coverage. That includes medical liability, where if you're in an accident, you're going to be covering the cost of somebody else's medical. Same with homeowners insurance. Same with business insurance. All of these are also health insurance costs that are completely left out of the conversation. I'm in the middle of this right now. I was injured supposedly on the job. I have been refused on my personal medical insurance. And as an independent owner-operator, I pay for my full cost of workman's comp. So I literally pay 2 times for my health insurance.
Margie, it's an excellent point, and I'm sorry you're going through that. And I know so many other Americans are going through similar stuff, whether they run their own business or whether they even have a job. But it's I'll give you another one, and that is just the taxes that we pay. All this discussion about the taxes are going to go up if we do health care for all. Recognize that one of the biggest drivers of state taxes, one of the biggest drivers of what it costs to run schools, what it costs to run police departments, what it costs to run fire departments, are healthcare costs, health benefits costs, which are so high. If we did get a handle on those, if we did have a better system of insurance and could drop those costs by 30%, that could increase our ability to deliver services or decrease taxes that people pay federally and state. So you're right, hidden costs of our stupid non-healthcare system is a wonderful point. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Show. We're going to be right back after this with our last big segment. Stay with us. It's been wonderful being with you. Happy Veterans Day. We'll be right
back. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We fight for democracy. We advocate for democracy. And coming up next, Drew Penrose is going to talk about what just happened on ranked choice voting. We're back.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stop Being Reasonable, How We Really Change Our Minds by Eleanor Gordon Smith. This is from the introduction. Somewhere in the technological belt of California, where the only thing more precisely engineered than the software is the people, or maybe the people's teeth, lives an organization called the Center for Applied Rationality. For the low price of $3,900, the center will sell you a 4-day workshop on reasoning, during which participants eat, sleep, and take part in 9 hours of back-to-back activities together daily under one, presumably rationally designed roof. This year, like every other year, the center will receive hundreds of applications from people who want to attend because, as they put it, everyone I know is irrational and I want to fix them. These folks make for an easy punchline, a good group to laugh at, but it turns out many of us make a version of the same mistake when we think about persuasion. We think we know what it is to change our minds rationally, and the only question is why other people don't do it more often. The ideal mind change is calm. It reacts to reasoned argument. It responds to facts, not to our sense of self or the people around us. It resists the siren song of emotion. People like to talk about the public sphere, if there is such a thing. Then its convex edge reflects this idealized image back at us. Think of the number of programs dedicated to the mind-changing magic of two sides saying opposite things. Meet the Press, State of the Union, Face the Nation. The branding of these things often bakes in a little reward. How brave I am for attending the Festival of Dangerous Ideas. How clever for my subscription to the Intelligence Squared debates. The proper way to reason, at least according to our present ideal, is to discard ego and emotion and step into a kind of disinfected argumentative operating theater where the sealed air conditioning vents stop any everyday fluff from floating down and infecting the sterilized truth. Years ago, I used to share this view. I'll tell you why, even though it will rightly want to make you take my lunch money. When I was in school, I was a champion debater, which was another way of saying I spent my weekends wearing a blazer and telling people in precisely timed intervals exactly how wrong they were. My teammates and I constructed arguments for 20 hours a week, putting premises in the crosshairs with the unblinking accuracy of people whose whole egos were on the line. We weren't bad either. Eventually, we made it to the World Championships in Qatar, where we wore blazers embroidered with the Australian coat of arms in gold and competed in what looked, in hindsight, like a scene in an apocalypse movie just before the purge begins. All of us in matching uniforms on fleets of white buses being shepherded through the desert haze to auditoriums where we would sit locked up together for an hour, surrounded by stopwatch-wielding officials. Debating left me with an attitude toward persuasion that was as precise as Euclidean geometry. Find the foundation, show why it's wrong. Buttress analysis with evidence. Emotion is for decorative flourishes only. Do not expect it to be load-bearing. Of course, I knew you could change minds by appealing to things like emotion or your opponent's sense of self, but doing that seemed kind of base. It felt nobly sportsmanlike to arm yourself with argument alone. It was the intellectual equivalent of turning up at dawn for your duel with your pistols shined and paces counted. It was how you were meant to fight. This perspective began to change after I produced a piece for the radio show This American Life in 2016. The idea had seemed simple. Turn around to my own catcallers, men who had wolf whistled or made sexual comments to me on the street, and try to reason them out of doing it again. I spent hours giving these men all the evidence, all the reasoning, all the fancy footwork with premises. But after dozens of conversations, I walked away defeated. Over and over again, they walked away from our conversations as sure as they'd ever been that it was okay to grab, yell at, or follow women on the street. These men didn't seem fundamentally irrational or unstuck from reality. In fact, in a funny sort of way, I quite liked a few of them. One told me he modeled his courtship rituals on the animal kingdom. I'm just another paradise bird flaunting my stuff, he said triumphantly, as though this explained everything that needed to be explained. That's a good line. He made me laugh, but I couldn't change their minds. The experience deflated me, not just as a person and as a woman, but as someone who has always been optimistic about our ability to talk each other into better beliefs. We finished recording in November 2016, right after the U.S. general election, which set up a grim backdrop for a newly found pessimism toward rational debate and persuasion. But when the piece aired, a strange thing happened. I was inundated with interview requests. Could I write a 10-step guide to changing minds? Would I accept an award for the successful use of rational persuasion in public? What advice did I have for talking people out of being workplace harassers? I was astonished. Large numbers of people had apparently listened to my conversations with catcallers on the radio, conversations that I had walked away from feeling dejected and defeated, and heard instead instances of persuasive success. I think the explanation is that these conversations bore a sort of Madame Tussauds-like resemblance to what we think good mind changes look like. I said one thing, my catcaller said the opposite thing, and each of us tried to explain why we were right. I had stayed calm. They had been prepared to hear me out. I had used statistics. It looked for all the world like a rational debate, and the fact that I had failed to change any minds with this approach disappeared under the shadow of the unquestioned assumption that I deserved congratulations for even trying. I started to smell a rat. The book Stop Being Reasonable by Eleanor Gordon Smith.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
I have a democracy fetish. I'm fascinated by the thing. Doesn't mean I always love it, but it does mean I remain fascinated in it. I remain desirous of it. I am hopeful that we can engage with it and make democracy better. And I'm grateful to our next guest, Drew Penrose from fairvote.org, who's going to talk to us about ranked choice voting and what just happened in an election last Tuesday. Drew, calling from Maryland. How you doing?
Good. Glad to be on the show.
So give us the update. So ranked choice voting. Do you want to do the update first or describe ranked choice voting first? Why don't we describe ranked choice voting first? What the heck is it? A lot of our listeners know it. We have a bunch of nerds like me who listen, but there's some less nerdy people who probably want to know as well.
Sure, it's not just for nerds anymore. We're in the mainstream now. Ranked choice.
Is that the brochure? Is that
right?
I put the first emphasis on the first syllable of brochure. It's not for nerds anymore. Anyway, keep going.
Right. Yeah, ranked choice voting is it's a method of voting, and it's not too different from what people do today. In most places, you just choose your favorite candidate, and whoever happens to get the most votes is the one that winds up winning the election. Ranked choice voting, it's just like that. You choose your favorite candidate, except if your favorite candidate can't win, you actually get to say, well, this is my backup choice, this is my second choice, this is my third choice, and so on. That way, when you count up those first choices, if nobody has a majority of the vote, you eliminate the candidate in last place. And if your favorite candidate, your top choice, is eliminated, then your vote counts for your backup. Your vote counts for your second choice. And you just repeat that.
What's the difference between ranked choice voting and instant runoff voting? Same thing?
Yeah, the instant runoff voting is another word that's used for ranked choice voting in some places. Technically, ranked choice voting can also apply to other forms of voting where you rank your choices. For example, it's used in multi-winner elections as a form of proportional representation, which is also a really good thing. But it's not the form of voting that was used in most places that used it this past Tuesday.
And this has mostly been an idea, right? I mean, it's mostly been something that some math nerd would say, hey, here's a better way to actually do this stuff. Or sometimes maybe after like the Ralph Nader election, they say, oh, well, here's after George W. Bush beats Al Gore, there are people who say, oh, here's another way we could do it. But it's been just kind of an idea. What places have actually enacted before Tuesday? Who's actually used it? Maybe San Francisco? Who else?
Right. So that's what I would have said when I started at Fair Vote, I think. At the time, it felt like it was just something that I had heard about it and seemed like a really great idea to me. And when I talked to people about it, it seemed like a good idea to them. But it wasn't something that a lot of people had known more viscerally. However, the uses of it have really exploded in the United States. So I could, list off the places that are using it today. Yeah, so in the California Bay Area, you've got San Francisco, Berkeley, San Leandro, and Oakland.
And actually, we should say this is a perfect time to say what just happened Tuesday, because I think a big jurisdiction just adopted this, yeah?
That's right. So the big news is that New York City adopted ranked choice voting, the instant runoff form of ranked choice voting, for use in their primary elections citywide. Now, the use of ranked choice voting in New York City more than triples the number of people in the United States using ranked choice voting. So it really does. And that's, in 2016, Maine, the state, adopted it for all of its statewide elections. It used it for the first time for federal congressional elections in 2018. It's going to be using it in 2020. They actually expanded it to include their presidential election as well, so it'll be used for president in Maine in 2020. But even with Maine using it, counting everybody in Maine, New York City still triples the number of people.
And in terms of budgetary size, and at risk of promoting Michael Bloomberg's candidacy for president and bolstering his bona fides, the New York City, here's a fun fact for you who like fun facts. New York City is the third biggest government in terms of budget in the United States. First, the U.S. government. Second, state of California. Third is the city of New York, because they also run their schools. Whereas in our state, in California, for instance, the schools are run and funded by the state. So New York, was it a close vote in New York?
Oh, no, not at all. There was no doubt as to what New Yorkers wanted. It passed with about 75% in favor.
So 75% in favor, vote in New York. That makes it the biggest jurisdiction, multiplies the number of people who live in realms with ranked choice voting. Go ahead and continue your list of now who else has it. Did you get through it all already, or anybody left?
Oh, no. So I mentioned Maine. I mentioned the 4 cities in the California Bay Area. A couple cities in New Mexico. So Santa Fe used it for the first time in June of 2018, went really well there and expanded almost immediately to the city of Las Cruces, New Mexico, who used it for the first time this past Tuesday. A couple of cities in Utah used a form of ranked choice voting. That was a bill that passed with broad bipartisan support out of the Utah state legislature to allow cities to do it, and 2 of them picked it up, Payson and Vineyard. Few cities in Minnesota.
Which Utah towns? I know Utah somewhat, but I don't know those towns. Say them again.
Okay. They're both pretty small towns. So
Yeah.
there's Payson, Utah, and Vineyard, Utah. They're both in Utah, Utah County. Yeah.
And they're doing that for their city council races?
That's right. Yeah, they used it for a few city council seats, 3 seats in Payson, 2 seats in Vineyard, and they'll use it in their mayoral elections next election cycle.
Keep going.
Okay, a couple places in Minnesota. So Minneapolis has been using it for a while. St. Paul had an election this past Tuesday. They added St. Louis Park, which used it for the first time just this past Tuesday. So 5 places across the United States used it for the very first time just this past Tuesday. So you want to talk about the momentum that this is growing with.
What do you chalk up? And one of the things I find fascinating about your list, it's not all just fluffy-hearted blue places, right? I mean, this is, when you mentioned Utah, first the Utah legislature had to allow it, and then a couple towns in Utah actually had to install it. This is something that seems to have appeal across what otherwise seem like impenetrable partisan barriers. What do you chalk that up to? What do you ascribe the momentum to?
Absolutely. It's a completely nonpartisan reform, just sort of a smarter way of doing elections. You know, the way we do them now, choosing only one, has a certain kind of intuitive appeal. It's simple, but I think after we've been using it for a while, we've started to see some consequences to it that we don't like too much. So one is that a lot of these places, the cities in Utah, for example, were holding runoff elections. So you hold a second election. And there's a simple reason not to like that. It's expensive. You know, you have to spend a bunch of money to hold a second election to have people come back to try to get majority support. And then not that many people wind up showing up for the runoff election anyway, which often undermines the whole point of holding it, you know, of getting that majority support. Ranked choice voting allows you to consolidate that into a single election. Part of the New York City story is actually related to that as well, because they had primary runoffs if nobody got above 40% of the vote in a primary election. Very, very expensive, very low turnout, very unrepresentative turnout. Primary runoffs in New York City no longer going to be a part of their system. So it solves some really basic problems, makes elections friendlier, more fair. Just sort of an easy fix to a lot of the things that people are most frustrated with in politics today.
Well, Drew, really appreciate your time. By the way, just as an aside before we wrap, have you heard of the star voting thing, which is sort of a twist on, they would probably say an updated version of ranked choice voting, where you actually get to score folks, not just rank them? They almost got it passed in Eugene. They might get it passed this time. Have you followed that yet?
Yeah. So star voting, you're giving people a rating on a scale from 0 to 5.
Yeah.
And this is a method that hasn't been used anywhere yet. I'd like to see it. I'd like to see more experimentation with it. I'd like to see it used in some private associations and that sort of thing. Not sure how I feel about it in public elections quite yet, but it's a new idea. It was just invented a few years ago.
So I think it's funny. I think it's funny that you're like the status quo guy now. Like the ranked choice be like, well, that's a new idea. We better test this before not just government yet. No, I appreciate you taking the time, man.
All right, thank you very much.
People can find out more at fairvote.org. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jefferson Smith. We're going to be going to break in just a second. When we come back, we'll get to a speed round and then our big finish. Are we ready for a break now? Can we take our break now? We're not ready for the break now. Why don't we, Toby, let's take your call from Weatherford, Texas. Go ahead, Toby.
Yes, Jefferson, I appreciate your show. I live down here in Texas, and I want to tell you what's going on down here.
Yeah.
In 2017, at the Federal Building in Fort Worth with Social Security, I was declared totally disabled and by an administrative law judge. And I want to tell you, I have lived with the same man for 21 years, and he and I are married. We were married in 2016. And I have yet to get Social Security disability. I don't have SSI. I don't have any Medicaid. And recently, the Health and Human Services in Austin cut my food stamps. I want to tell you, I have absolutely nothing. And my partner is 75 years old, and he's disabled and retired. And when it comes to paying utility bills every month, we have to go out to food donation organizations to try to get help because we don't have enough from his Social Security retirement.
And how come? Is it that do you think it's discrimination based on your marital status? Do you think it's
I don't know. We can't say. I think when they found out we were married, that's when they said we were disqualified. But, you know, I mean, we've been living together for 21 years, and I don't know what to think. All I know is I have absolutely nothing, and I'm surviving just with help from my spouse here.
Oh, dear Toby, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry.
Well, I don't know what to do, and I appreciate your show.
My email address is jeffersonsmith@gmail.com.
Times are rough down here in Texas, I want to tell you.
I hear you, Toby, for a lot of people. We'll
You're
be back.
listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back with Speed Round coming after this. It can be tough to go to break when you have someone who pours their heart out about not just their critique of the current political system, but what's happening to them in their own lives. And what are we supposed to do with that? How do we manifest our actual humanity, our actual connection, so we're not just, I don't know, infotainment? And I don't really know yet. I can at least think of one thing, and that is germane to the common topics of this program. And that is the talk about the economy. The stock market has had a 10-year rise. It's the longest consistent rise in American history. And that means that stock-owning media conglomerates talk really well about the economy. And unemployment has gone down, which is wonderful for so many people who now have jobs. If we don't at the same time, every single time we talk about the economy, also talk about what's happening with inequality, we're just lying. If what we mean by lying is aware of the truth and communicating a falsehood, if we talk about economic growth and don't talk about persistent and even rising inequality, we're just lying. We're just failing to tell people what's actually going on. So like that caller's like, he's hearing everything. Oh, something's so great. Stock's going great. No, everybody's got jobs. Okay. Take a look at your neighborhood. Or if you live in a wealthy neighborhood, take a look at the neighborhood next door. And look at how many people have jobs that they are more than worthy for that barely allow them to live. Think about folks who are having a hard time getting the benefits they used to be able to get because those benefits have been cut. Think about the gaping hole, the gaping chasm betwixt rich people and poor people in this country, bigger than any time since the turn of the last century. If we're going to talk about the stock market rise, we're going to talk about unemployment, we got to talk about inequality as well. And if we don't, we're being immoral, and I think we're just being liars. We're at least not telling the whole story. Let's talk to Mick from, Wynn has been here very patiently. Go ahead, Wynn.
Yes, I've got a situation to talk about Medicaid here, where I have to move for my health, but I was wondering if there was some kind of clearinghouse where I could find out if I have to end up in another state, how do I know what the benefits are going to be? Because it's very good here in Maine, medical benefits through the state Medicaid system, which here is called MaineCare. It's very, very good. But how do I know what I'm going to gain or lose by going to another state? Is there a clearinghouse where I can find out this information?
Where you can find out what the Medicaid benefits on the state you're moving to? Where are you moving to?
I don't know that at this time. And because of the fact of this dilemma, I don't know what state, I've got several choices of where to go to, but I don't know if I'm going to be stepping into a black hole because of disparity.
This is going to get pretty quickly. We're going to break, almost thankfully for me, before it just exposes more of my ignorance on the subject. But my best guess is do a Google search, talk to the providers in your state for anything they've got. But then if you got 3 or 4 options, I would just start with the Google search and then talk to some folks, including some people who receive services in those states, to try to get advice. You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. I'm Jefferson Smith. We're going to be finishing up in just a minute. And we're coming back. This is the Thom Hartmann Program. Thank you so much for being with us. We're going to go straight to your phone calls, quick speed round. Mike from Seattle, Washington. How you doing? Oh, excuse me, Mick from Seattle, Washington. Go ahead, Mick.
Hey, good afternoon. I'm calling because I want to propose something that we lack in our country and in the world, and that's an International Peace Day. We have holidays for commemorating those that have died for keeping the peace, but we don't have a day where we can strive for just eliminating any acts or events of violence, including demonstrations and everything.
Mick, thank you so much. George from WCPT, Ain't Afraid of Me. Go ahead, George. George, you there?
Hello, I'm here.
George, go ahead.
Yeah, I just would like to say on this Veterans Day that I'm the proud son of veterans, plural, not singular. My father served in combat in the Navy in the Atlantic and the Pacific in World War II. My mom was in the U.S. Army Nurse Corps in North Africa in the same war. And in addition, her older brother, my uncle, who I never knew because he died years before I was born, was a B-24 navigator who wasn't one of the lucky ones who came home. But I just wonder wherever they are now, if they look back to those days of their time of service and sacrifice, and if they could have ever imagined back then that our country would be presided over by a draft dodger like Trump, uttering pretentious nonsense at a Veterans Day parade in New York, and another draft dodger, another Republican war wimp like Pence, laying a wreath at the tomb of the unknowns. I think it's a indication of how far our country has fallen in some ways, that guys like this don't exist in dark corners hiding their faces in shame, rather than being in charge of the country.
George, thank you so much for that call. Vince from Hampton, Virginia, speak your piece. You're on Speed Round.
Yes. I want to complain about how the media and our Democratic leaders can't seem to brand things properly or be on topic. Like today is Veterans Day, and the guy just said Trump's a draft dodger and so forth. They're not focusing on that. He's playing the dozens, which is a game we used to play in the ghetto, where you would say, "Oh, you're so ugly. You look in the mirror, it cracks." He's doing that, and people understand what he's saying. And we need to brand this scandal the perfect call and hashtag the perfect call. We need to call him the Orange King. We need to call his supporters the Hatriots, and we need to start using his terminology. And when he calls her Pocahontas, she should say, "Yeah, you know what? You probably do want to call me that because you probably want to grab her by what."
Vance, appreciate your call. I would say, to me, it's not only about what it's called, it's about media capacity. And right now, there is an inequivalency in media capacity. Jesse from Pound, Virginia, who I think has something to say about the media.
First of all, I think that the liberals need to remember that if we are to have the moral high ground, we have to go high. We could not fall prey to a lot of the stuff I'm seeing on the left with the name calling, the attacking Trump supporters, or even people on the left who think, maybe this is God's punishment because we screwed up so badly the last couple of years that Trump was able to slide in because we lost the trust of the American people. And this ties into with the current situation going on with the Internet, constant Internet censorship, especially on YouTube. I mean, for Christ's sake, how can we say we're not the fascists if we're basically engaging in fascist behavior, censoring people, refusing to allow open discussion, using all sorts of techniques basically to villainize people for no good reason, simply because they happen to, want to call out lies going on that the left is engaging in.
I hear you, Jesse. Thanks for the call. We're on Speed Round. Judy from Ann Arbor.
Hi. I just want to mention the previous caller who asked about an International Day of Peace.
Yeah, there is one. When is it?
Yes, September 21st. If he goes online and Googles it, you can find an event near you. You can create one of your own. There's organizations that do them every year. I go to a place in Detroit that does an interfaith one, but there's all sorts of different events. International Day of Peace, September 21st.
September 21st. Thank you so much, Judy, for the call. Susan from Saratoga Springs, New York.
Hi, how are you? Thanks for taking my call.
Thanks for waiting.
I just turned you on a little while ago, and to the gentleman who was talking about who had such terrible economic problems with Social Security. To his particular issue, there is a lot. And what I can say, I've been talking about this and felt this for many years, of course. You know, I'm a burner and everything. But we really need to look at older women that are divorced. Now, I'm older, divorced, have an autistic son who's 30 that I caregive to. And at 63, it's very hard for me to find a full-time career job, nor can I do so because of my responsibilities for my son.
Yeah.
And so now one of the issues that really bothers me, and I think it should be a Supreme Court issue, is the fact that my ex-husband makes good money. He's still working, but I could collect half of his money for being married to him for 18 years, but I can't do it until he starts collecting.
Yeah. Yeah, you're our very last caller that we have time for today, and appreciate it. And generally understanding that income and wealth inequality between men and women, and if the only thing we did for wealth inequality was address it for women and people of color, we would deal with just an enormous amount of wealth inequality generally. And if you go the flip side, if we just addressed wealth inequality in all its forms for everybody, that would do more than almost anything else that we could do for gender and sex inequality and for racial inequality. So appreciate you finishing us on that. Thank you, everybody, for spending this time. We had a caller who didn't end up getting on who wanted to make sure that we were reminded this is, in fact, Veterans Day. We remember that. And while we thank everybody who serves, this day in particular is for those who have risked their life for the country. We appreciate them, and we appreciate you. You are the coalition of the benevolently irrational, the good people doing good things for no good reason. Without you, democracy didn't have a chance. With you, we do have a chance, and you are priceless. Definition of priceless, worth a lot, not for sale. We had a chance to talk about flipping off the president today, Medicare and Medicaid. We had a chance to talk about what's the definition of a moderate. We'll tweet some stuff out. And we took your calls. It was an honor to be with you. Thom Hartmann will be back with you tomorrow, which is a good thing because this is called The Thom Hartmann Show. I'm Jeff. Goodbye.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
We say